Section 1. The town that should have asked a question. Bart Simpson is 10 years old. He was 10 when the show began in 1989. He is 10 right now, and he will be 10 in any episode that will ever be made. Lisa is 8. Maggie is 1. Homer collects a paycheck from the same ancient billionaire who has never once remembered his name, and nobody in Springfield has ever stopped to say, "Wait." Something is deeply wrong here. We are going to say it. The theory that explains everything wrong with Springfield in a single sentence. The nuclear power plant is mutating the entire town, not as a metaphor, not as satire. Within the established logic of the show's own universe, using only evidence the show itself provides, the contamination is physical, biological, and neurological. It has been happening for decades. And the reason nobody has noticed long enough to act on it is itself a symptom of the damage. Let's begin with what the show tells us directly. The Springfield nuclear power plant is mutating its entire town. Not metaphorically, not as satire. Within the established logic of the show's own universe, using only the evidence the show itself provides, the theory argues that the plant is physically, biologically, neurologically altering every living thing within Springfield's borders. It has been doing this for decades. And the reason nobody has noticed, or rather, the reason nobody has been able to sustain their noticing long enough to act on it, is itself a symptom of the same contamination. The circular nature of that argument is exactly what makes the theory so difficult to argue against. Let's start with what the show tells us directly, the facts rather than the interpretation. The Springfield nuclear power plant is a 2-unit pressurized water reactor facility. It is owned and operated by Charles Montgomery Burns. It is the primary source of electrical power for Springfield and its surrounding areas, which means the entire community is economically and functionally dependent on its continued operation. And by any standard of measurement available within the fiction, it is one of the most catastrophically mismanaged industrial facilities ever put into a piece of popular entertainment. A surprise safety inspection was conducted at the plant. The inspection found 342 individual violations of safety protocol. 342. Not a handful of concerns, not a few areas for improvement. 342 specific, documented failures of the systems designed to keep a nuclear reactor from harming the people around it. The estimated cost to bring the plant into compliance with basic safety standards was $56 million. Charles Montgomery Burns, a man whose personal wealth has been depicted across multiple episodes as extending into the billions, refused to pay it. His refusal was not based on financial hardship. Burns has enough money to personally fund experimental medical treatments that sustain his improbable lifespan, to construct elaborate schemes involving geological drilling equipment and mechanical sun-blocking devices, to maintain private physicians and a full pharmaceutical infrastructure on his property. The $56 million was well within his means. He refused because paying it would require acknowledging the violations existed. And acknowledging the violations would invite questions about what those violations had already done. The violations themselves, the ones the show surfaces across various episodes, are not minor paperwork failures. Radioactive waste has been dumped directly into local waterways. Radioactive material has been left on children's playground equipment. Plutonium has been used as a paperweight on a desk where a human being sits for 8 hours a day. The cooling towers have structural cracks that have been patched not with proper materials but with chewing gum. Animals living inside the facility emit visible light and darkness. And in the basement, the show places a detail it drops casually and never retrieves. Human skeletal remains. Not one skeleton, multiple. Human bones in the basement of an active nuclear power plant, noted in the safety inspection, seen on screen and then abandoned without explanation or investigation. The show never says who those people were. It never says how they got there. It just shows you the bones and moves the scene along, trusting that you will carry the question forward even though Springfield never will. The person standing between all of this and the general public is Homer Simpson. The show's own creator, Matt Groening, has stated in interviews that Homer has an IQ of approximately 55. A season 12 episode reveals that Homer has been living since childhood, with a crayon physically embedded in his brain, pressing against his gray matter and suppressing his cognitive function. When the crayon is removed, Homer's intelligence jumps immediately and dramatically. He becomes articulate, perceptive, capable of understanding complex situations that had previously been entirely beyond him. The change is not subtle. It is not a small improvement. It is a transformation. He has the crayon put back. This is the man who falls asleep at the reactor controls. The man who, during a meltdown warning, prioritized finishing a donut. The man who threw a confectionery item into a reactor core to see what would happen. This is the safety inspector of a nuclear facility with 342 violations, cracked cooling towers, and human bones in the basement. He has been in that role for over 30 years. The first visible mutation the show presents us with arrives in Season 2. A fish is pulled from a river near the power plant. The fish has 3 eyes. It is given a name in subsequent episodes, Blinky. The 3-eyed fish becomes something the show treats as a local curiosity, a Springfield mascot of sorts. It is on bumper stickers. It becomes a campaign issue. A gubernatorial candidate holds Blinky up and says, "This is what the power plant has done to our environment." Burns is forced by public pressure to eat the fish on live television to demonstrate that it is safe. He eats a bite, he smiles. The cameras cut away. The town watches and shrugs and goes back about its business. No one commissions a water study. No environmental agency sends investigators. No one asks the next question, which is so obvious that a child could ask it, and in fact the show never has a child ask it, because asking it would require following the answer to where it leads. If the fish in this river have 3 eyes, what has been happening to the people drinking the same water? The show answers that question in Season 8, though it never frames the answer as an answer. It frames it as a punchline. Homer sees something in the woods near Springfield. He is convinced it is an extraterrestrial. The entire town agrees. FBI agents come. The episode builds genuine suspense around the mystery of what Homer saw. And when the answer arrives, it is this. What Homer saw was Mr. Burns. Burns, returning from his weekly medical treatment in a state of such chemical saturation that his body emits a soft green glow visible in the dark. The treatment keeps him alive for exactly 1 more week. Without it, he would die. The regimen is so disorienting that Burns wanders from the facility in a dazed, euphoric state and stumbles through the woods near town. A glowing man emerging from the forest. A green-lit figure stumbling through the darkness. And the first instinct of every person in Springfield is alien, from outer space. Not the nuclear power plant that has been sitting on the hill above them their entire lives. Not the billionaire who has been contaminating their water supply for decades. An alien. That is how deep the denial runs. Or, that is how deep the damage goes. In the Simpsons movie, the evidence becomes something the show can no longer contain within the frame of a single episode. Springfield's environmental contamination reaches a level so acute that the Environmental Protection Agency of the United States, a real federal regulatory body operating within the fiction, determines that the town must be physically contained. A massive glass dome is lowered over the entire community to prevent its pollution from spreading to the rest of the country. The United States government looked at Springfield and determined that it was so toxic, so fundamentally compromised, that the only viable response was physical quarantine. Not cleanup, not remediation. Quarantine. The kind of response reserved for the most extreme hazardous material situations, the kind that says the contamination is no longer a problem that can be solved, only a problem that can be contained. And when the dome goes up, the people inside are all still there. Every resident who has been drinking the water, breathing the air, eating fish from the river, living within range of those cracked and gum-patched cooling towers for their entire lives, they are all still inside when the glass comes down. Now look at the residents. Look at them the way you might look at a population study rather than a cast of characters. Homer Simpson has a skull shape that does not correspond to any recorded human anatomy. He has 4 fingers on each hand, a feature that is shared by virtually every person born and raised in Springfield. His body endures physical trauma that would be fatal to any normal human being. He has been shot, he has been electrocuted, he has been hit by moving vehicles, he has fallen from significant heights, he has survived explosions, he has walked away from accidents that should have left him in pieces. His healing rate is not merely accelerated, it is physiologically impossible by any normal medical standard. His pain tolerance is similarly extraordinary. He can absorb punishment that would leave an ordinary person incapacitated and respond with mild, temporary irritation. A man who has worked in direct proximity to an active reactor core for 30 years, whose workplace has 342 documented safety violations, whose town is classified as a federal containment zone, whose body has evolved to withstand physical trauma that would kill almost anything else. Marge Simpson worked briefly at the nuclear power plant as well. She was exposed to the same facility, the same leaking infrastructure, the same contaminated environment. All three of her children were born after both parents had already spent years in Springfield's compromised atmosphere. And Bart, Lisa, and Maggie all share the same physical characteristics. The yellow skin, the four-fingered hands, the hair that holds impossible shapes without any product, the bulging eyes, the structural anomalies that seem to belong to some parallel branch of human anatomy rather than the one the rest of the world shares. Here is what makes this detail particularly hard to dismiss. When characters visit Springfield from outside, when celebrities appear or strangers arrive from somewhere else, they look different. Their proportions are more natural. Their features have a specificity and a dimensionality that Springfield residents lack. The show draws outsiders with anatomy that more closely resembles actual human beings. It draws Springfield residents with exaggerated, anomalous features that cluster around the same set of deviations: the eyes, the mouth, the proportions, the skin tone. The standard explanation is art style. The Simpsons has a distinctive visual language, and the characters are designed to exist within it. The exaggeration is aesthetic, not narrative, but inside the logic of the show's own universe, inside the fiction it has been constructing for 36 years, there is a consistent, observable, visual difference between people who live inside the contamination zone and people who come from outside it. The people who grew up in Springfield look one way. The people who visit from elsewhere look another way. Springfield's residents look like what happens when a population is exposed to an environmental mutagen over multiple generations. The animals are affected too. The Simpson family dog has the same eye anomalies as his owners, the same proportions that deviate from normal canine anatomy. The fish in the local river have 3 eyes. The wildlife near the plant's runoff is canonically, explicitly, on-screen mutated. The show tells you this directly. It shows you the 3-eyed fish and says, inside the fiction, this is what the radiation does to living things. And then it expects you to believe that the people breathing the same air and drinking the same water have somehow been entirely spared. Burns understands what is happening. The show makes this clear enough across enough episodes that calling it subtext starts to feel generous. Burns funds private medical research. He retains personal physicians with experimental capabilities. He undergoes weekly treatments that exist nowhere in conventional medicine and that sustain his biological function through what appears to be controlled radiation therapy. He understands radiation on a deeply personal level because radiation is, in the most literal sense, what is keeping him alive. A man who depends on managed radiation exposure for his own survival, who owns a facility that has been leaking unmanaged radiation into the environment for decades, who has spent a century watching the population of that environment. Burns knows what chronic radiation exposure does to living organisms because he is a living organism managing chronic radiation exposure with every resource his extraordinary wealth provides. He knows what his plant is doing to Springfield. The evidence the show provides is consistent with this. Burns is not negligent in the ordinary sense of the word. He is strategic. He has built and maintained a system with a specific purpose, and the contamination of Springfield is either an acceptable cost of that system or, in the darker reading, a feature of it. When German investors purchased the plant briefly, they fired Homer within hours of taking control. The first thing competent management did was remove the person whose incompetence was ensuring the violations continued. Then they assessed the cost of compliance and were nearly bankrupted by the estimate. Burns bought the plant back. He rehired Homer immediately. A safety inspector doing the actual job would shut the facility down within a week. Homer does not do the actual job. Homer ensures the violations continue. The radiation keeps leaking. The water stays contaminated. The population stays cognitively compromised enough to look at a glowing figure in the forest and think, extraterrestrial. And Burns maintains his monopoly over Springfield's electricity, its economy, and through those things, the people who live inside it. The crayon in Homer's brain is not the full story of his cognitive damage. It is a piece of it. Season 12 removes the crayon and Homer becomes, temporarily, a different person. Intelligent, praise, or understanding. His own life with a clarity he has never had before. He sees Springfield for what it is. He sees his job for what it is. He sees the structures of control and exploitation that he has been embedded in without ever being able to perceive them. And it makes him miserable, not gradually, immediately. Because seeing clearly in Springfield is a form of suffering that the town's other residents have been protected from by the same damage that limits them. Homer has the crayon put back. He chooses the fog. He chooses not to see. But the question the show never asks is the most interesting one. How did the crayon get there in the first place? Homer went through his entire childhood and adolescence and adult life visiting Springfield medical professionals, receiving checkups, being treated for various injuries. Not a single doctor ever found a foreign object embedded in his brain. Not in childhood, not in adolescence. Not in 30 years of working at a nuclear power plant with a legally mandated occupational health monitoring program. Either every doctor in Springfield operates at a level of incompetence that defies explanation, or someone with the ability to influence Springfield's medical establishment chose not to have certain findings reported. Burns employs physicians. Burns has an extensive private medical infrastructure. Burns's influence extends throughout Springfield's institutional life in ways the show has documented repeatedly. If Burns needed Homer specifically to remain cognitively limited, if Burns needed his safety inspector to be exactly the level of impaired that he is, then the possibility that Burns's influence reached into the healthcare system of the town he essentially owns is not a stretch. It is a logical extension of everything the show has already told us about him. The people of Springfield have something wrong with their brains. Something that keeps them below the threshold of the kind of clear thinking that would let them look up at those cooling towers and ask the most basic question a person can ask. Why are we all like this? The radiation theory does not explain one mystery about The Simpsons. It explains all of them. The characters do not age because the contamination has altered their biology at the cellular level in ways that disrupt the normal mechanisms of aging. The town resets between episodes because the population's memory function has been compromised by decades of neurological damage. Homer survives fatal injuries because his body has adapted to radiation exposure in ways that have made him extraordinarily resilient physically, while devastating him cognitively. Burns sustains his impossible lifespan through managed radiation therapy and the infrastructure of extreme wealth, while the rest of Springfield gets the unmanaged version and the consequences that come with it. Nobody questions any of this because the same contamination that mutated their bodies also damaged the part of their minds responsible for asking questions. Springfield is not a quirky cartoon town. It is a contamination zone with a zip code and a football team and a Quick Mart on the corner. The residents are not eccentric. They are symptomatic. Every yellow face, every four-fingered hand, every impossible recovery, every forgotten catastrophe, every reset, every mystery that appears in one episode and vanishes before the next one airs. All of it traces back to the same cracked cooling tower, leaking the same invisible thing into the same water supply, feeding the same damaged brains that cannot figure out why their fish have 3 eyes and their children have never aged past 10. The plant is not just part of the show, the plant is the show. And nobody in Springfield will ever figure that out, because the plant already made sure they can't. Before we move into the next section, take a moment to drop a comment. Tell us where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. There's something quietly wonderful about knowing who else is drifting through Springfield tonight. And if you're settling in for the long one, make sure you're subscribed. We have a long way to go through this town, and we are just getting started. Section 2. The Dream That Never Ended. There is a theory about The Simpsons that most people have encountered in some form, even if they could not tell you where they first heard it. It moves through fan communities with the persistence of something that has the shape of truth, even if it cannot be proven. It was first formally proposed by an anonymous user on a forum, passed through discussion threads and fan sites for years before reaching enough people to generate a response from the show itself, and when the show finally responded, the response was peculiar enough to keep the theory alive rather than putting it to rest. The theory is this: Homer Simpson entered a coma in April of 1993, and he has never woken up. Every episode that has aired since that date, every storyline and character arc and guest appearance and absurdist adventure is the product of an unconscious mind generating an elaborate simulation of the life it loves most, from a hospital bed in Springfield General, while the body it belongs to slowly loses its battle with the dark. To understand why this theory has the staying power it does, and why so many people who encounter it find it impossible to completely dismiss, you need to understand the specific episode it is built around and the specific detail within that episode that the show deposited and never retrieved. Season 4, Episode 18, the 1st of April, 1993. The episode is called So It's Come to This, a Simpsons clip show. It is a clip show, largely, a format the show has used periodically to look back at its greatest moments through a framing narrative. But the framing narrative this time is not merely a device for organizing the clips. It is the seed of the most discussed fan theory in the show's history. The premise: it is April Fool's Day, and Bart is escalating his pranks on Homer in the classic Bart fashion, each one more extreme than the last. The escalation culminates when Bart takes one of Homer's beer cans to an auto body shop, convinces the employees to let him use an industrial paint shaker, and places the can inside it. The machine pressurizes the can to an extraordinary degree. When Homer opens it later, the explosion is violent enough to hospitalize him. He survives the explosion. He is in a hospital bed, conscious, recovering. And then he sees a vending machine across the room. Homer wants a candy bar. He gets up to use the machine. The machine tips. It falls on Homer. And Homer Simpson flatlines. He enters a coma. This is not presented as a joke. It is not a cutaway gag. The show depicts Homer clinically unconscious, with the medical apparatus of a coma patient, with his family gathered at his bedside in genuine distress. The episode uses the coma as its framing device. Memories play, the family waits. And then the ending comes. Bart tearfully confesses at Homer's bedside that the whole April Fool's escalation was his fault. He is genuinely, visibly distressed, a child confronting the possibility that he has accidentally killed his own father. Homer springs awake. He begins strangling Bart, as Homer does. The family laughs. Everyone laughs. The reset is warm and funny, and everything returns to normal, except for the final moments of the episode, which the show delivers and then abandons. Homer's doctors inform him that the coma has caused permanent brain damage. He has lost 5% of his brain function, not temporarily, permanently. 5% of his cognitive capacity gone, destroyed by the pressure damage of unconsciousness, never to return. Homer's response to learning this is to laugh. He says he does not understand why he is laughing. The family finds this charming. The episode ends. The coma theory takes this ending and treats it not as a comedy beat but as a hinge point. The theory asks, what if the show is being precisely accurate here? What if Homer lost 5% of his brain function, and the reason he does not understand why he is laughing is that his brain damage has already altered his perception to the degree that he cannot recognize his own disorientation? And then the theory takes the next step. What if the show's depiction of Homer waking up is itself part of the dream? What if the revival, the moment of Bart's tearful confession and Homer's comic return to consciousness, is the first scene of the coma simulation rather than the end of the coma episode? What if Homer never woke up? What if everything that has aired since April 1993 is the content of a dreaming mind, lying in a hospital bed, generating a world it loves with whatever cognitive resources it has left? The most immediate piece of supporting evidence is the tonal shift. People who have watched the show with enough attention to notice its quality across seasons have been arguing about the exact moment it changed since at least the late 1990s. The early seasons have a specific quality. They are grounded in a way that feels almost counterintuitive for a show about a cartoon family. The situations are recognizable. Homer tries to stop drinking and cannot sustain the attempt. Marge briefly considers whether she wants something different from her life and has to face the fear in that question. Lisa develops a hopeless, sweet, painful crush on a substitute teacher and has to let it go when he leaves. Bart faces the possibility of being held back a year and has to sit with what that would say about him. These are family anxieties, money anxiety, marital anxiety, the particular loneliness of the very smart child in a household that does not know quite what to do with them. They are told through the lens of satire and broad comedy, but the emotional core is rooted in things that real families actually feel. After the coma episode, the show becomes something different. Not immediately and not all at once. But the trajectory is clear. Homer goes to space, not as a metaphor, actually as a NASA astronaut launches into Earth orbit and comes back. Burns captures the Loch Ness Monster and brings it to Springfield. Homer becomes the leader of a vigilante squad. Homer is inducted into a secret society with ancient rituals and a membership that includes some of the most powerful people in Springfield. Homer discovers that his mother is alive and has spent decades living as a fugitive radical. Homer meets God face to face, not once but twice. Homer travels to dozens of countries, meets presidents, holds hundreds of different jobs, befriends celebrities, and survives physical events that would eliminate a group of trained soldiers. The show went from a grounded family sitcom built on recognizable domestic anxiety to a show in which the main character has done more extraordinary things in a single fictional lifetime than any human being in recorded history. The escalation is not subtle. It has been the subject of discussion and debate for decades, usually framed as a question about when the show jumped the shark, or when the writers ran out of material, or when the priorities of the show changed. The coma theory offers a different explanation for the escalation. It did not happen because the writing got worse. It happened because Homer's brain got worse. Because a mind losing function gradually over years generates dreams that become progressively less tethered to the ordinary, progressively more surreal, progressively more detached from the grounded reality of the early seasons. The increasingly cartoonish plots of the later seasons are not a failure of craft. They are an accurate depiction of what happens to a dreaming mind as it deteriorates. There is a detail in the season before the coma that sits in the theory like a stone placed with precise intention. Season 4, Episode 3. Homer the Heretic. Homer decides, one Sunday morning, to skip church and stay home. The episode is about faith and laziness, and ultimately warmth, as the best Simpsons episodes are. Homer spends his Sunday at home, enjoying his own company, and eventually falls asleep on the couch and has a dream. In the dream, he speaks directly with God. Not a metaphor for God. Not a representation. The entity that presents itself in the dream as God addresses Homer by name, engages with Homer's reasoning, and gives Homer what reads as genuine divine guidance. God tells Homer, in this conversation, that Homer will one day learn the meaning of life. The understanding Homer seeks is out there. It will find him, but not yet. God tells Homer that his time is coming, that the moment of understanding has not arrived. 6 months later, Homer enters a coma. The timing is real, the dialogue is real. It is in the show, in a canonical episode, preceding the coma episode by half a year. The coma theory looks at that sequence and sees something the show never labeled explicitly, a prophecy. God was telling Homer that his waking life was nearly over, that something was approaching, that the time Homer had been given for ordinary living was drawing toward its end. Whether that reading is the intended one or a construction that the human mind imposes on adjacent events because we are pattern-seeking creatures is a reasonable question. Both things are true about the theory in general. It finds patterns, and the patterns are there in the text whether or not they were placed deliberately. The aging problem is where the coma theory becomes, for many people, the most elegantly complete explanation available. Nothing in Springfield ages. Nobody gains a year. Nobody graduates or retires or dies of old age or moves through any of the stages that time normally moves people through. The floating timeline, the production convention that keeps the show's characters at fixed ages in a perpetually updated present, is the most discussed formal feature of the show and the one that every theory has to account for. The radiation theory says the mutations from nuclear contamination have disrupted the biological mechanisms of aging. The cartoon logic explanation says this is simply how long-running animated shows work. The format does not permit character aging because aging has narrative consequences that make the show harder to sustain across decades. Both of these explanations have merit. Both of them are true in their respective registers. But the coma theory offers something they do not. It offers an emotional answer to sit beside the structural one. Nobody ages because they exist inside the frozen mind of a man who went under in April 1993. Homer's unconscious brain cannot generate his children getting older because he was not there to watch them get older. He does not have the information. The last time Homer saw Bart, Bart was 10. The last time Homer saw Lisa, Lisa was 8. The last time he held Maggie, she was 1 year old. His memory of them is fixed at the precise moment the world went dark, and memory is the only raw material the dream has to work with. Of course, they do not age. They cannot age. Homer does not know what they look like at 11 or 9 or 2. He only knows them as they were on the last day he was conscious. Marge does not age because the last face Homer saw before the machine fell was hers, exactly as she looks in every episode. His house does not change because his memory of the house is precise and fixed. The neighborhood stays the same. The Quick Mart is always open. The nuclear plant is always on the hill, because the dream cannot update what it does not have new information about. It can only repeat what it already knows. That is not a production convenience. That is a portrait of grief. A man who loved his family so much that the last resource his dying mind allocated, the last project it undertook before the darkness became total, was building their faces again and again in the dark and making sure they stayed. The celebrity appearances in later seasons, which become more frequent and more tonally incongruous as the show progresses, fit the coma theory with a precision that the statistical coincidence explanation for predictions cannot quite match. Homer is in a hospital. Hospitals are full of ambient sound. Televisions run in common areas and nurses' stations. Radios play. Conversations happen in the hallway outside his room. Visitors come and go and speak to each other and to the unconscious man in the bed. The world keeps happening around him, and fragments of that world seep through. A name heard on a television becomes a face in the dream. A voice from a radio becomes a character who belongs in Springfield. Homer's brain, receiving sensory input from the hospital environment, processes the sounds and incorporates them into the simulation. Famous names become famous guests. The constant cultural noise of the hospital becomes the celebrity flood of the later seasons. Every celebrity who walks through Springfield in a post-1993 episode is a voice Homer heard through the fog of unconsciousness, assembled by a dreaming mind into a person who makes sense in the world it is constructing. The celebrities are not visiting Springfield. They are visiting Homer's hospital room, and Homer's mind is translating them into Springfield residents the only way it knows how. The show did eventually acknowledge the coma theory, not warmly, but in a way that tells you something about how seriously the writers take it. A fake deleted scene was deliberately prepared in which Homer wakes from a long coma and the reveal confirms that all the extraordinary episodes had been a dream. The scene was fully animated, fully voiced, and complete. It was subsequently identified as not being official show content, attributed to hackers who had placed it in circulation. But someone made it. Whatever the circumstances of its creation, the scene existed. Someone animated Homer waking from a coma. And the official response was not to say the idea was bad or narratively wrong. The response was to say the scene was not genuine. The coma theory is structurally interesting to note. There is a difference between a fake scene and a wrong scene. The show's denial of the coma theory has consistently been about authenticity rather than accuracy. It has never been a substantive rebuttal of the evidence. It has been, that is not our official answer, which is different from, that is not what is happening. Executive producer Al Jean addressed the theory in 2015 and said simply that it was not true. He did not explain the tonal shift. He did not explain God's conversation with Homer 6 months before the coma. He did not explain why the timeline froze exactly at the episode where Homer suffered permanent brain damage. He said it was not true and the interview moved on, because that is what interviews do. And the fans did not move on, because the theory does something no official statement has managed to do. It makes the entire show cohere as a single unified experience. Every feature of the series that requires explanation, every anomaly, every apparent failure of logic or continuity, can be accommodated within the coma framework in ways that feel emotionally satisfying rather than merely mechanical. The part of the coma theory that stays with you longest is not the evidence. The evidence is interesting, but it is the kind of thing you can argue about. The part that stays is the emotional logic underneath it. If the coma theory is true, the show's central narrative is not comedy. It is love. Specifically, it is the story of what a person holds onto when they are losing everything else. Homer's dream is not grand. He does not dream himself powerful or wealthy or admired. He does not dream himself smarter than he is, or younger than he is, or more successful than he has been. He dreams himself on a couch, watching television, with his family in the house around him. He dreams Marge still loving him. He dreams Bart still being his mischievous, intact, alive, nearby boy. He dreams Lisa still playing her saxophone in her room. He dreams Maggie still small enough to hold in one arm. The things Homer chooses to dream, if he is dreaming, are the most ordinary things imaginable. Not adventure, not triumph, not resolution of any of life's larger questions. Family. The specific texture of a specific Friday night in a specific house in a town that nobody would call remarkable, and the dream gives him this, forever. Nobody leaves. Nobody grows up and moves away. Nobody dies. Nobody stops loving him. The loop does not allow for loss. It only allows for continuation. Every reset at the end of every episode. Every return to the couch and the television and the family intact. The coma theory says this is not lazy writing. It is Homer's brain refusing to let the story end. Because if the story ends, the dream ends. And if the dream ends, Homer has to face whatever is waiting on the other side. Maybe his family is still there. Maybe they have been sitting by his bed for 30 years. Maybe Bart is an adult now, and Lisa is in college, and Maggie has been walking and talking for 25 years, and Marge has been coming to the hospital every day with fresh flowers. Or maybe not. The dream does not risk finding out. Homer's coma is not a nightmare. It is the closest thing to heaven a man like Homer could construct. A house on Evergreen Terrace where the beer is cold and the kids are young and nobody has to say goodbye. The show will never confirm it, but it will never disprove it either. The evidence is built into the structure of the series itself, woven into 3 decades of episodes, visible to anyone who is willing to look at it directly. And every episode you have ever watched, every laugh, every warm ending, every couch gag, and every act of grace, if the theory is true, is a love letter from an unconscious father to the family he cannot reach, written in the dark. Delivered by a dreaming mind, addressed to the people he refused to let go of. Section 3. Who really pulled that trigger? We know what the show tells us. Season 7, Episode 1. Maggie did it. Baby with a gun. Case closed. The greatest mystery in the show's history resolved in the premiere of a new season, Chief Wiggum pointing at an infant, and the town accepting this as justice because, as Wiggum himself observes, no jury in the world is going to convict a baby. Except, the mystery of who shot Mr. Burns is one of the most examined narrative events in television history. Not just in animation, in all of television. The show promoted the 2-part story like a cultural happening. Fox ran national advertising campaigns. America's Most Wanted, a real true crime television program, produced a tie-in special called Springfield's Most Wanted that treated the fictional shooting as though it were an actual unsolved case. A national contest invited viewers to submit their guesses, with the prize of being animated into a future episode going to whoever figured out who pulled the trigger. Thousands of entries came in. The producers, according to DVD commentary on the episodes, reviewed a randomly selected sample of those thousands of entries. From that sample, not one person had identified the correct answer. The person who received the prize, chosen at random because nobody in the sample had the right answer, was given a cash payment instead of the animation appearance, because they could not be animated as the winner of a contest they had not won. The show's creators acknowledged being aware of one person, posting on an early internet forum the night of the original broadcast, who had named the correct answer. This person was using a college account. By the time the contest closed and the producers tried to locate them, the account had been deactivated. They issued an open invitation on the DVD release for this person to come forward. Nobody did. Sit with that for a moment. The show told millions of people that this mystery was solvable from the evidence available in Part 1. It ran a national promotional campaign around the solvability of the mystery. It promised a significant prize to whoever solved it. And when the answer was revealed, essentially the entire viewing audience had not solved it. The one person who apparently had was gone before anyone could verify it. Either the clues were genuinely insufficient, the red herrings were more effective than the actual evidence, or the answer did not follow logically from what was provided, despite what the show had implied. All 3 of those may be true simultaneously. To understand why the mystery still matters 30 years later, you have to go back to the setup and appreciate how carefully it was constructed. Season 6, Episode 25. Who shot Mr. Burns? Part 1. the summer of 1995, and The Simpsons is about to attempt something no animated series had ever tried. A genuine mystery, with real misdirection, real stakes, and a real cliffhanger designed to leave an audience arguing for months. Burns, in the weeks before the shooting, has done more damage to Springfield than any single entity has managed across the entire run of the series. He arranged for an oil well to be discovered beneath Springfield Elementary, used geological equipment to siphon all of the oil for his own benefit, and in doing so destroyed the financial foundation of the school. He leveraged that oil wealth to drive Moe's Tavern into bankruptcy. He created a sinkhole that collapsed the Springfield retirement castle. He arranged for Santa's little helper, the Simpson family dog, to be injured. He fired Smithers, his loyal assistant of decades, for objecting to his next plan. And then he built a sun-blocking device, a massive mechanical disc that he positioned above Springfield to block out the sunlight over the entire town. He stole the sun. Not metaphorically. He physically prevented sunlight from reaching Springfield so that every resident would have no choice but to purchase their electricity from his plant. He took the sky itself and held it hostage. By the end of the episode, every person in Springfield has a real, documented, specific reason to want Burns dead. The show takes its time building this. Homer, because Burns has spent years being unable to remember the name of the man who works directly for him. Bart and Lisa, because the school lost everything. Grandpa, because his retirement home was destroyed. Groundskeeper Willie, because the school's collapse cost him his job. Tito Puente, because Burns cut the music program. Moe, because his bar was driven under. Smithers, fired and visibly falling apart. The list is long. It was built to be long, deliberately, so that when the shooting happens, every possible suspect is equally plausible. The town gathered at a public meeting to confront Burns. The tension in the room was visible. Multiple characters were shown with weapons. And then a shot. Burns collapsed. He staggered to the town sundial and fell against it, his hands coming to rest on two letters. W and S from the viewer's perspective. M and S from Burns's perspective as he looked up at the dial from below. The screen went black. America had an entire summer to argue about it. Part 2 arrived in September. The investigation is a comedic procedural, which is appropriate since the detective is Chief Wiggum, whose relationship with competent investigation has always been aspirational rather than actual. Smithers confesses within the first act. His confession immediately falls apart when it becomes clear that he was blackout drunk the night of the shooting and actually discharged his weapon at an entirely different person in an entirely different location. He shot old Jasper in his wooden leg, not Burns. Wrong victim, wrong place, wrong crime entirely. One by one, the suspects with the clearest motives are cleared. Skinner has an alibi. Moe has an alibi. Tito Puente delivers what is possibly the most memorable alibi in television history. A fully staged musical number in which he explains that he channeled his rage into the composition of a samba rather than any form of violence. The investigation stalls until a single eyelash is found on Burns's suit. DNA analysis, which feels implausible given the technological capabilities of the Springfield Police Department but is presented as a plot device, identifies the eyelash as belonging to a member of the Simpson family. Fingerprints on the gun match Homer. Homer had the most emotionally raw motive of anyone at the meeting, Burns's years-long inability to remember his name having driven Homer to visible distress multiple times. Homer is arrested and is approaching conviction. Then Burns wakes up. He looks around the hospital room. He identifies the person who shot him. He says, "It was Maggie." Baby Maggie Simpson encountered him in the parking lot after the meeting. He tried to take her lollipop. His gun fell from his holster in the struggle. Maggie picked it up. The gun discharged. Burns was shot. Case closed. Now let's examine the problems with this answer, starting with the most fundamental one, the sundial clue. The entire national promotional campaign around the mystery was built on this image. Burns's hands resting on two specific letters on the sundial as he fell. M and S. The show positioned this as the central piece of evidence, the image that would guide the viewer to the right answer. In the resolution episode, Burns is asked about this. He is asked whether he deliberately positioned his hands on those letters as a signal, as a dying man's attempt to communicate the identity of his attacker to whoever might find him. Burns says no. He just fell. His hands landed where they landed. The positioning was coincidental. The central piece of evidence in the most promoted mystery in the show's history is acknowledged by the victim to be a coincidence. The sundial pointed at Maggie Simpson. Burns says he did not point the sundial at Maggie Simpson. He fell. Both of those things are in the show. The show presents them without resolving the contradiction, because resolving it would expose the gap between what the evidence was supposed to mean and what it actually means. Then there is the gun. Burns carried a gun in a holster. The holster is shown to be empty before the shooting. The gun was already missing from his person before he was attacked. Whoever shot Burns used Burns' own weapon, taken from him at some point prior to the moment the trigger was pulled. This tells you something specific about the shooter. The person who shot Burns did not arrive at the town meeting armed and planning to use their own weapon against him. They acquired Burns' gun through some prior interaction and used it when the opportunity arose. The shooting was not necessarily premeditated. It may have been impulsive. A person who found themselves holding a gun they had not brought, facing a man they had reason to hate, and acting without planning what came next. A baby finding a gun on the ground fits this profile. So does roughly a dozen other characters present that night who were not carrying weapons of their own. But there is another implication here that the analysis often overlooks. Whoever took Burns' gun was close enough to Burns to take it. At some point before the shooting, there was a physical proximity between Burns and the eventual shooter that allowed the gun to change hands. This narrows the field considerably, and it is worth asking which characters had that kind of access to Burns prior to the town meeting. Burns' last words before being shot were 4 words. "Oh, it's you." He recognized the person in front of him. He was not alarmed. He was not afraid. He spoke with the weary, casual familiarity of someone who has encountered this person before and did not particularly expect this specific moment, but was not shocked to see this specific face. "Oh, it's you." The greeting of recognition without surprise. Does Mr. Burns recognize Maggie Simpson? Has he ever interacted with her in any meaningful way before this episode? The show does not establish a relationship between them. Burns barely recognizes Homer, the man who works directly for him. The idea that he would see a baby he has no prior connection to and respond with the calm recognition of, "Oh, it's you," as though acknowledging a familiar acquaintance, requires a significant assumption that the show never provides supporting evidence for. That reaction belongs to someone Burns has history with. Someone whose presence in that parking lot, holding his gun, registered as recognizable, even expected. In a season 18 episode, Homer Simpson says, on camera, in a canonical episode of the show, that he was the one who shot Mr. Burns. He just says it, out loud. In a scene that is not played as a confession and does not receive any of the gravity a confession of attempted murder would typically receive. Nobody investigates. Nobody calls the police. Nobody reopens the case. The richest man in Springfield was shot, spent time in a coma, and the crime was officially resolved with an infant as the perpetrator. Homer says he did it, and the scene moves on. The most charitable reading is that Homer is lying for attention, or misremembering, or making a joke. These are all things Homer does regularly, and all are consistent with his character. The less charitable reading is that the original verdict was wrong. That the DNA evidence pointed at a Simpson and the investigation latched onto the most convenient Simpson, the one who could not be prosecuted, the one who could not deny the accusation, the one whose guilt would close the case without requiring anyone to do anything difficult, and that the actual shooter, who was someone else, has been walking free ever since. The Marge theory has been circulating in fan communities for years, and its internal logic is stronger than it might initially appear. Marge Simpson watched Burns systematically dismantle everything that mattered to her family. The school lost its funding, which meant her children's education was compromised. Her family's dog was injured. The sun was blocked above her home. The retirement facilities where people like her father-in-law lived were destroyed. Every escalation Burns undertook in the lead-up to the shooting damaged something Marge cared about. There is also the episode in which Burns became infatuated with Marge after she worked at the plant. He pursued her. He developed genuine feelings. The show explores this with surprising emotional complexity. Burns was not merely attracted to Marge as an object. He was drawn to her in a way that, within his emotional vocabulary, constituted something meaningful. The theory proposes that Burns, upon waking from his coma and finding himself in a hospital room with police investigators waiting for his identification of the shooter, chose not to name Marge. That when he saw who was holding the gun in that parking lot, the instinct that activated was not justice but protection. That the man who was shot looked at the woman who shot him and chose, for reasons the show has established exist, to protect her. Maggie became the answer, not because the evidence pointed there, but because Maggie was the cleanest possible solution. A baby cannot be prosecuted. A baby cannot be sentenced. A baby cannot be made to suffer any consequence for any act. And Burns, pointing at the sundial with hands that had fallen there by coincidence, let the town draw whatever conclusions it wanted to draw. The final shot of the episode supports this reading as much as the official one. Maggie, alone in a room after everyone has left, looks around to confirm she is not being watched and moves her pacifier in a gesture that mimics pulling a trigger. The show frames this as private confession. She knows what she did, but a baby who watched someone else shoot a man, who saw the motion, who stored it in sensory memory, the way young children store vivid events, would produce exactly the same shot. She is not confessing. She is remembering. She is replaying the thing that happened, the way very young children replay the things that impress themselves on their attention, without fully understanding what the event meant. The footage is identical. The interpretation is everything. The alternate endings tell you something about how resolved the show's own writers actually were about the Maggie answer. A complete alternate conclusion was animated, fully voiced, and fully produced, in which Smithers is revealed as the shooter, not sketched, not scripted, animated, voiced, complete. It was later shown in a clip show episode, dismissed by the host as an ending that could not have been right because ignoring the DNA evidence pointing to a Simpson would have been, quote, downright nutty. That specific word choice is precise. It aired in the same year as the O.J. Simpson verdict, in which a jury was widely criticized for disregarding DNA evidence and reaching an acquittal. The show is making a specific reference to a specific cultural moment. It is saying, yes, sometimes the official verdict does not follow the evidence. Sometimes the DNA gets ignored. Sometimes the official answer is determined by factors other than what the evidence actually shows. The show is not being subtle here. It is winking directly at the audience and saying, you know that official answers are not always accurate ones. You know that cases get closed rather than solved. You have been watching the news. An early draft had Barney Gumble as the shooter. The writers considered this option seriously enough to develop it. The point is not which of these alternatives was considered. The point is that multiple alternatives were considered, that the answer was not locked in from the beginning, and that the clues were adjusted retroactively to fit whatever conclusion was ultimately selected. The mystery was not solved and then clued. It was clued backward from a solution the writers landed on after exploring multiple options. In a town where every single person had a genuine motive, where dozens of characters were visibly armed at the meeting, where the victim had just stolen the sunlight from an entire community, how is it possible that only one shot was fired? Springfield is not a town known for restraint. These people riot over minor provocations. They form mobs over misunderstandings. They have burned down public buildings because of a bear. But when Burns blocks out the sun, when he takes the sky itself from them, when he compounds this with every other act of institutional cruelty he has committed across the preceding weeks, only one person pulls a trigger? Either Springfield's population is dramatically more docile than the show has ever depicted them, or the shooting was not as spontaneous as the official story suggests, or most of the people at that meeting, most of the people with weapons, chose not to fire because someone else had already acted. The greatest mystery in The Simpsons history was closed. It was given an answer, and the answer was officially declared final, and the case file was marked resolved. But a closed case and a solved case are different things. A closed case is one where the investigation ends. A solved case is one where the truth is known. In Springfield, the first kind is the only kind that ever gets filed. Section 4. The Man Who Refuses to Die. There is a problem with Mr. Burns that the show has never directly addressed, despite building the evidence for it across dozens of episodes and nearly 4 decades of broadcast. It sits in the open, completely visible, never quite named, never quite resolved, because naming it and resolving it would require the show to commit to an explanation that it has always been more comfortable leaving as implication. Charles Montgomery Burns should not be alive. His age has been implied, stated, suggested, and contradicted in various episodes, but every version of the show's timeline places his birth somewhere in the latter portion of the 19th century. He has personal memories that he describes from first-hand experience of events that occurred before the turn of the 20th century. He speaks of the Gilded Age not as history he has studied, but as a period he lived through. He has referenced working relationships and personal encounters with historical figures who died before most of the show's audience was born. He served in the Second World War. By the most conservative calculation, working only from what the show states explicitly, Burns is well past 100 years old. By the most generous reading of the scattered and sometimes contradictory evidence the series provides, he may be approaching 140. And in all of that time, in all of those decades, he has not merely survived, he has functioned. He runs a multi-billion-dollar corporation with strategic acuity. He manipulates municipal politics with the practiced ease of someone who has watched politics operate for a century. He formulates and executes complex, long timeline schemes that require sustained planning, current knowledge of finance and law and technology, and the cognitive flexibility to adapt when things do not go according to plan. His body is frail. This is not in question. His physical strength is minimal. A light current of air seems capable of destabilizing him. He requires assistance with basic navigation of his own estate, but his mind operates with a clarity and a sharpness that most people half his apparent age do not possess. Mr. Burns is the most cognitively functional elderly person in American fiction, and he is cognitively functional at an age that no human being in recorded history has reached with any faculties intact whatsoever. The Springfield Files episode explains, more explicitly than any other episode of the series, how Burns maintains his impossible lifespan. He undergoes a weekly medical treatment, not monthly, not annually. Every single week, on a precise schedule, Burns submits to a medical regimen that the show does not fully describe but clearly indicates involves chemicals and radiation therapy of an intensity that goes far beyond any conventional medicine. The treatment is so disorienting, so physiologically destabilizing in the short term, that in its immediate aftermath, Burns wanders from the treatment facility in a dazed and euphoric state, unable to navigate normally, stumbling through the surrounding area in the dark. His body, after treatment, emits a visible green glow. Not a faint luminescence, not a trick of the light. A visible, unmistakable green glow that is bright enough to be seen across a forest clearing at night, and which Homer Simpson interprets, without irony, as evidence of extraterrestrial origin. The treatment keeps Burns alive for exactly 7 days. Not approximately 7 days. Exactly. The margin for error is 0. Miss one treatment and the biological equilibrium, the treatment maintains collapses. Miss one treatment and Burns dies. His life is sustained the way a machine is sustained, through scheduled maintenance on a precise timetable. Miss the service date and the machine fails. The treatment involves radiation. This is not incidental. Burns is the owner of a nuclear power plant. Burns has spent his entire adult life in close proximity to nuclear material. Burns has been saturated with radioactive substance for so long and so thoroughly that his body has been fundamentally altered at the cellular level. Normal biological processes are no longer sufficient to sustain him. He requires external radiation input, the way an ordinary organism requires food and water and sleep. Burns is not profiting from radiation while remaining untouched by it. He is dependent on it. His relationship to the material that poisons his town is not one of exploitation from a safe distance. It is one of mutual entanglement. He cannot live without it. And without his continued operation of the source of it, his treatments would eventually become impossible to maintain. Burns needs the plant. Not for profit, for survival. The plant is keeping him alive, and the plant is poisoning everyone else. There is a scene that has been widely quoted for its absurdist humor and widely discussed for the strange implication it contains once you take it seriously. Burns visits a doctor and receives a physical examination. The doctor delivers his findings. Burns has every disease known to medical science. Not a selection, not a concerning number. Every disease. Every pathology in the medical literature exists within Burns's body simultaneously. The doctor explains how Burns has not died from any of them. Three Stooges syndrome, the doctor calls it. All of the diseases are present at once. All of them are attempting to progress and kill their host at once. And because they are all competing for the same resources simultaneously, none of them can advance. Each illness is blocked by every other illness. The field is too crowded for any single pathology to dominate. Burns's diseases are in a state of perfect equilibrium, each one preventing all the others from becoming fatal. The doctor's conclusion: Burns is the sickest human being in the United States, and also, as a result of being the sickest human being in the United States, essentially impossible to kill through illness. The show plays this as comedy. It is comedy. But under the lens of what we know about Burns's weekly treatments and his century of radiation exposure, it becomes something else. The equilibrium is not natural. The diseases do not maintain their perfect, stable balance through any ordinary biological mechanism. They maintain it because the weekly treatments maintain it. The radiation being administered to Burns every 7 days is doing what his own immune system cannot do, what no medicine could do, which is keep every pathology in precisely calibrated stasis. The treatments do not cure the diseases. They prevent any of them from winning. They keep the war inside Burns's body permanent and inconclusive, a biological ceasefire that has to be renewed every week or it collapses. Burns's body is a reactor. The weekly treatments are the equivalent of adjusting the control rods. Get the calibration wrong and the whole system goes critical. Get the calibration right and the reactor keeps running indefinitely. Smithers is not an assistant. He is the system operator. Smithers manages Burns's schedule. He ensures that the treatment appointments are kept without exception. He monitors Burns's physical condition with a vigilance that the show depicts repeatedly as bordering on obsessive, which takes on a different quality once you understand what the obsession is actually about. He is not devoted to Burns out of sentimental loyalty alone, though sentimental loyalty is real. He is devoted to Burns because he understands, better than anyone outside of Burns's medical team, what happens when the schedule slips. Without Smithers managing the treatment timetable, Burns would miss a dose. The disease equilibrium would collapse. Every illness in his body would surge forward simultaneously. Burns would die from all of them at once, which would be grotesque and final. Smithers keeps Burns alive through logistical precision, and the knowledge that his absence is a death sentence for the person he has devoted his life to, is the foundation that their entire relationship is built on. Not just the emotional complexity that the show has explored at length, not just the unrequited devotion and the complicated power dynamic. Underneath all of that is a simpler truth. Smithers has made himself irreplaceable in the most literal way possible. Remove him and Burns dies. That is not just devotion. That is leverage, even if Smithers would never conceptualize it that way. Burns's connections to historical events accumulate across the series into a picture that is difficult to account for through ordinary biography. He served in the Second World War. His service was, by any reasonable assessment, morally compromised. He stole $1 trillion bill from the United States government during wartime and kept it hidden for decades. He has referenced the Gilded Age from personal experience. He knew Howard Hughes. He attended Yale. He was part of historical events that have been over for most of a century. His family's wealth predates the Industrial Revolution. The Burns dynasty is depicted as one of the oldest continuous concentrations of power in American history, the kind of wealth that builds infrastructure and then charges others to use it, the kind that sits so far above ordinary legal accountability that law becomes theoretical rather than practical. Burns stepped into this dynastic legacy and has been extending it for over a century. He did not build it from nothing. He inherited a structure that was already ancient when he took control of it. And this raises a question the show gestures toward without ever fully engaging with. If Burns has maintained his own existence past the normal human lifespan through artificial means, and if his family has maintained continuous control of their fortune across generations, longer than most American institutions have existed, what did the preceding generations do? Before nuclear radiation, before modern medicine, before any of the technology that currently keeps Burns functional? Did the Burns family employ other methods? Did the dynasty's extraordinary continuity require something extraordinary from each generation? The show does not answer this. but it establishes through accumulated detail that the Burns family has done something to maintain its power over time that goes beyond ordinary succession and good management. The continuity is too clean, too uninterrupted, too resistant to the disruptions that time and generations normally inflict on even the most entrenched dynasties. Something has always been done to ensure it. Burns has come close to dying more times than almost any other character in the series. Shot, hospitalized, collapsed, abandoned in wilderness conditions that should have been fatal, poisoned, attacked. The instances accumulate across seasons into a pattern, and the pattern is consistent in one specific way. Burns always comes back through infrastructure, not through cartoon resilience. Homer survives through a mechanism that resembles divine intervention more than medicine, and the coma theory has one explanation for this, and the radiation theory has another. Burns's survival mechanism is different. When Burns is near death, money arrives, physicians appear. The machinery of wealth that he has spent a century building activates and performs whatever intervention the situation requires. Homer's survival is passive. Things happen to Homer, and his body simply absorbs them. Burns's survival is engineered. It is the ongoing output of a project he has been working on his entire life, spending every dollar toward the same final purpose: keep the system running. Keep the treatments coming, keep the diseases in balance, keep the reactor operational. Because if Burns dies, the empire dies with him. And empires do not permit themselves to die while they still have resources. The truly unsettling dimension of the Burns immortality theory is not the longevity itself. It is the dependency. Springfield cannot survive the collapse of Burns's empire. The town's electricity, its largest employer, the financial infrastructure underpinning most of its commercial activity, all of it connects back to the plant. Remove Burns and the plant loses its owner. Remove the plant, and Springfield loses its economic foundation. The town is not simply damaged by Burns's existence. It is built around it. Springfield cannot kill Burns, because Springfield cannot function without Burns. And Burns cannot die because dying would mean his system finally has to answer for what it has done. The contamination, the manipulation, the three-eyed fish and the human skeletons and the cracked cooling towers patched with gum, the mother driven into exile, the son kept broken, the entire population compromised and dependent. All of it would have to be accounted for. Burns stays alive not because he deserves to, not because any law of nature or morality requires it. He stays alive because he has made himself the load-bearing wall of an entire community's existence, and the community would rather live in a damaged building than tear out the wall and rebuild. He is the oldest man in Springfield. He may be the oldest man in the country. He glows after his treatments and remembers the Spanish-American War as a personal event and keeps alive through a weekly intervention that should be impossible, surrounded by a population too compromised to ask why he does not look a day older than he did when most of their grandparents were children. He is not immortal. That word implies something natural about the condition. He is too expensive to die. And Springfield will keep paying the bill. Section 5, The Day Truth Was Made Illegal. Season 9, Episode 2, The Principal and the Pauper. It aired on the 28th of September 1997, 28 years ago, and the conversation about it has not stopped. The backlash when this episode first aired was immediate, specific, and intense. Fans felt genuinely betrayed. Critics argued that the show had committed a kind of narrative violence against one of its most beloved characters. The episode is still regularly cited as the moment The Simpsons changed, the moment the writers stopped honoring the trust the audience had placed in the world they had built, the moment continuity was sacrificed for a cheap twist. Harry Shearer, the voice actor behind Principal Skinner and Mr. Burns, publicly stated his unhappiness with the storyline. For an actor to publicly criticize a writing decision on the show he appears in regularly was unusual. It suggested that the discomfort with this episode extended beyond the audience. And yet, the more you look at this episode through the lens of everything else we have been discussing tonight, the harder it becomes to dismiss it as a failure. The harder it becomes to see it as careless or cynical or unaware of what it was doing, the more it starts to look like the show's most honest episode. The one time, in nearly 800 episodes, that the show let the audience watch the mechanism of Springfield's impossible continuity operate in real time. Here is what happens. Springfield Elementary holds an event honoring Principal Seymour Skinner's 20 years of dedicated service to the school. It is warm and sincere. Skinner has been in the show since the beginning. He is tightly wound, haunted by Vietnam, dominated by his mother Agnes, locked in perpetual low-level combat with Bart Simpson, and deeply, genuinely committed to the school he runs. He is a character the audience knows. They have spent years with him. During the ceremony, a stranger enters. He is not recognized by anyone present. He introduces himself as Sergeant Seymour Skinner, the real Seymour Skinner, a decorated Vietnam War veteran who was captured as a prisoner of war during his service, held in a POW camp for years, and who has only now, after surviving and escaping and making his way home, discovered that someone else has been living his life in his absence. The man Springfield has known as Seymour Skinner for the entire history of the show is not Seymour Skinner. His real name is Armin Tamzarian. Before Vietnam, Tamzarian was a petty criminal from a background that offered him no particular future and no particular identity worth keeping. He was drafted, sent to war, and served in the same unit as the real Skinner. When Skinner was captured and presumed dead, Tamzarian felt responsible. He traveled to Springfield to deliver the news of Skinner's death to Skinner's mother, Agnes. Agnes assumed he was her son. She needed him to be her son. She was a woman alone who had just lost the only person she was close to, and here was this young man standing on her doorstep, and the need in her was so urgent that she did not look closely at whether the fit was real. And Tamzarian, who had never been wanted by anyone, who had never had a family or a home or a name worth keeping, let it happen. He became Seymour Skinner. He took the name and the rank and the history and the mother. He lived inside the stolen identity for 2 decades. He built a career in education, became a fixture of the community, and had, by any reasonable measure, given more of himself to Springfield than most people who had been born there, until the real Skinner walked through the door. What Springfield does next is the part that made the fans angry, and it is the part that makes the episode, viewed from a certain angle, the most honest thing the show ever did. The town holds a meeting. Both men are present. The full facts are known. Everyone in Springfield understands that the man who has been their principal for 2 decades is operating under a false identity, has been doing so for 20 years, and that the actual person whose identity was borrowed is standing in the room asking for his life back. The town votes. The town does not vote on prosecution. It does not vote on what would be fair to Tamzarian, or to the real Skinner, or to the students and teachers and community members who have built real relationships with the man they knew. It votes on something simpler and more radical. It votes on whether to acknowledge the truth. The verdict is unanimous. They will not. Judge Snyder issues a legal decree. Armin Tamzarian is officially and legally recognized as the real Seymour Skinner. The actual Seymour Skinner, the man who survived a prisoner of war camp and came home to find his name being worn by someone else, is physically removed from Springfield. He is tied to a railway car and expelled from the community. The judge makes it explicitly illegal, under penalty of torture, to ever mention the name Armin Tamzarian again. Truth is not just ignored. It is criminalized. The truth is given a name, classified as a threat, and its carrier is expelled from the community with legal force. Fans found this offensive because they loved Skinner. Because the revelation felt like a betrayal of years of investment in a character who turned out to be built on a fiction. Because the show seemed to be casually destroying its own continuity for the sake of a plot that did not earn what it took. All of that is fair criticism. The episode does damage to Skinner's character in ways the show never fully repairs. But here is what the angry response misses. The episode is not being careless. It is being precise. It is depicting something true about Springfield that the show has always been depicting, just usually without showing you the mechanisms. Springfield has always preferred comfortable lies over uncomfortable truths. Springfield has always found ways to forget whatever does not fit the preferred narrative. Springfield has always organized itself around the maintenance of a version of reality that the community can live inside comfortably. Every other time this happens, it happens between episodes. Something world-altering occurs, and the next episode begins with everything restored and nobody carrying the memory of what happened forward. The audience accepts this as episodic storytelling. The format? The way shows like this work. The Principal and the Pauper is the one episode in which the forgetting happens on screen, in which the audience is permitted to watch the process by which Springfield decides what is true and what is not, who is allowed to stay and who is expelled for insisting on accuracy. The show pulled back the curtain. The audience, understandably, preferred the curtain. Think about how many times Springfield has experienced events that should have permanently altered its reality. The town has been physically destroyed multiple times and rebuilt. It has been invaded. It has been sealed under a federal containment dome. It has experienced nuclear incidents, environmental catastrophes, alien encounters in the form of the glowing Burns encounter, and the literal blocking of the sun by its own most powerful resident. Every single time, the next episode begins with everything exactly as it was. Nobody remembers, nobody carries the trauma forward, no institution shows scars from what happened. The slate is clean. Fans have always called this episodic structure. The format of the show, a practical necessity of long-form serialized television that does not want to burden new viewers with an accumulated history. The coma theory says the resets happen because Homer's dreaming mind cycles between episodes the way sleep cycles between dreams, each new dream beginning fresh. The radiation theory says the resets happen because the population's memory function has been compromised to the degree that they cannot maintain complex, traumatic memories across time. The principal and the pauper offers a fourth explanation that is perhaps the most disturbing of all. Springfield resets because Springfield chooses to reset, collectively, deliberately, with full awareness of what is being chosen, through an unspoken but deeply established social contract that says, the version of reality we can live inside comfortably is worth more than the accurate version. And anyone who insists on the accurate version, anyone who shows up with proof that the official narrative is false, will be removed. Not metaphorically removed, not socially ostracized, tied to a train and expelled with a legal decree making it criminal to acknowledge their existence. Consider the chain of consequences that Springfield is protecting itself from. If the town acknowledged that their principal had been living under a false identity for 20 years, they would have to ask, how did this go undetected? What else has been accepted as real that is not? What other official narratives are being maintained by agreement rather than accuracy? And then the next question arrives. If people in Springfield are capable of sustaining a false identity for 20 years without detection, if the community's institutions are capable of accepting fiction as fact when it is presented consistently enough, what does that say about every other official story the town has accepted? If they acknowledged the principal's identity, they would have to think about whether they have missed other things. They would have to consider what the power plant has done to their water. They would have to look at the three-eyed fish and follow the question to its answer. They would have to look at their employer who glows in the dark and ask when they decided that was normal. They would have to look at their own children and count their fingers. If they challenged the principal's story, the questioning would not stop there. It would move outward, and eventually it would arrive at Burns. And if it arrived at Burns, the economy would be threatened. The electricity would be threatened. The entire infrastructure of the community would be threatened. So they vote. They vote for the lie. They make the truth illegal. They put the man who carried the truth on a train and send him somewhere nobody can find him. And they go home. And the next episode begins with everything exactly as it was. The real Seymour Skinner is, in the episode's final framing, Springfield's canary. The person who arrived with proof that the official narrative was false, who came home from a prisoner of war camp and expected that truth would have some claim on the community he had served, who discovered that in Springfield, truth has exactly as much claim as the community chooses to grant it, and the community had decided not to grant it any. He was not a villain. He was not asking for anything unreasonable. He was asking for his own name, his own history, his own mother who was still alive and could have known her real son. Springfield said no, not reluctantly, unanimously, and made it illegal to say otherwise. If the coma theory is true, this episode has an additional layer. Homer's unconscious mind constructed a scenario in which an entire community votes to sustain a fiction through collective agreement and legal force. Because Homer needs to believe that is possible. He needs to believe that the fake version of a life can be made real through sufficient consensus, that the dream can hold if enough people agree to treat it as waking. Because that is what Homer's coma is. A dream claiming to be reality. A fiction sustained by the sleeping mind of one man. And if Springfield can vote to make a 20-year lie legally real, then maybe Homer's 30-year dream can be made real in the same way. Maybe the loop can hold forever. Maybe nobody ever has to wake up. Section 6. The Baby Who Knows Everything. Maggie Simpson has been 1 year old since December 1989. In that time, she has not walked reliably, has not formed sentences, has not participated in the family's conversations in any vocal way. She has communicated through pacifier sounds and facial expressions, and the occasional pointed stare that the family interprets and acts on with a consistency that suggests they understand her better than they let on. She has spoken one confirmed word in 36 years of broadcast. Daddy, voiced by Elizabeth Taylor as a single episode cameo, never repeated. And in that time, without any of the visible markers of competence or capability that the world uses to evaluate people, Maggie Simpson has accomplished the following. She shot the most powerful man in Springfield. She organized and led a successful rebellion in a daycare facility controlled by a tyrannical caretaker who was significantly larger and better resourced than she was. She has saved her family from multiple situations that would have ended badly without her intervention. She has demonstrated problem-solving capabilities in spontaneous, uncontrolled situations that exceed what most of the adults around her could manage. She was tested for intelligence in multiple episodes and found to register at levels that the testing instruments were not designed to measure. She has done all of this in complete silence, with the deliberate maintenance of an appearance so ordinary and so consistent with what people expect from an infant that nobody has ever looked at Maggie Simpson and thought, "This child knows exactly what she is doing." That is the point. That has always been the point. The shooting of Mr. Burns is the act that defines Maggie in popular consciousness, though the theory we are going to explore tonight suggests it is actually the least interesting thing about her. The most interesting thing about it is not whether she pulled the trigger. It is what she did after. The official verdict, baby Maggie Simpson was identified as the person who shot the wealthiest man in Springfield. The investigation concluded. Chief Wiggum rendered his famous assessment, "No jury in the world would convict a baby. Maybe Texas, but not here." And then everyone left the room. Maggie was alone. The show gives us a single final shot. Maggie, by herself in an empty room, looks around. She takes her time. She is not moving reflexively. She is surveying the space with specific purpose, confirming that the room is empty, that nobody is watching, that whatever she is about to do will be done in private, and then she moves her pacifier in a motion that mimics the action of pulling a trigger. The show presents this as a private confession. She knows what she did. She did it. This is her alone moment of acknowledgement. But watch the shot again with different assumptions. A baby who was present when Burns was shot. A baby who saw the event happen in front of her. A baby who has now been told, through the accumulation of adult conversations happening around her, that she is the official answer to the question of who did it. She is 1 year old. She cannot fully process what an official verdict means, but she can store sensory impressions. She can replicate physical gestures. She can replay events that made strong impressions on her the way very young children replay vivid things they have witnessed. She saw someone shoot Burns. She is replicating what she saw, not confessing. Remembering, the footage is identical. The two interpretations produce the exact same image, and the show knows this. The shot was designed with this ambiguity built in. In 2012, Maggie Simpson was the subject of a 7-minute theatrical short film screened before a major animated film in cinemas. The Longest Daycare. It was nominated for an Academy Award. 7 minutes. One character. No dialogue. The setup is clean. Maggie is dropped at the Ayn Rand School for Tots, a daycare facility run with the kind of rigid institutional efficiency that the show has always used to satirize a specific strand of American ideology. Inside the facility, Maggie discovers a caterpillar that is preparing to form a chrysalis. She wants to protect it. Another baby, a recurring antagonist named Gerald, who has been squaring off against Maggie since the earliest seasons, wants to destroy it. What follows is a sustained sequence of Maggie executing a rescue operation with the strategic sophistication of someone who has thought through contingencies and prepared for obstacles. She reads the environment before acting. She identifies the threats and assesses their patterns. She identifies resources she can use and limitations she has to account for. She develops a plan and then modifies it as circumstances change. She times her actions to the movements of the staff and the other infants. She improvises when her initial approach fails. She executes a multi-step sequence that requires sustained concentration, precise spatial reasoning, and the ability to predict how other people will respond to her actions. Her body cannot fully support what her mind is doing. She stumbles. She falls. Her motor skills are genuinely limited by her developmental stage. There are moments where her physical constraints almost derail her completely, but her decision-making does not falter. Every choice she makes is the optimal one. Every modification she makes is in the right direction. She runs an operation that an adult with planning experience would be proud of, and she runs it in a body that has not yet learned to walk reliably. She succeeds. The butterfly is released, and nobody noticed what she actually accomplished, because she is a baby, and babies are not generally understood to be capable of what Maggie just did. The theory that explains Maggie's silence is not complicated once you see it. Look at what happens to intelligent women in the Simpson family. Lisa Simpson is a genius. Not gifted, not advanced for her age. A genuine genius who has repeatedly demonstrated intellectual capabilities that dwarf everyone around her. She plays music with real skill. She reasons through complex ethical and political situations with a sophistication that most adults do not reach. She has an IQ that puts her in a category that most standardized tests were not designed to measure accurately. And what has this intelligence produced for her? Isolation, year after year. She is mocked by her peers for being different. She is dismissed by authority figures who feel threatened by a child who understands things they do not. She is tolerated within her family but not quite understood by any of them, including the ones who love her most. She is the smartest person in almost every room she enters, and the rooms tend to respond by making her feel smaller than the furniture. Lisa speaks up and gets ignored. She challenges authority and gets punished. She tries to make the world around her better and gets crushed by the collective weight of a community that does not want to be made better, that finds the attempt itself presumptuous. Lisa's intelligence is her most essential quality and also the primary source of her loneliness, because she wears it openly. She announces it through how she moves through the world. She cannot help it. It is the thing she is, and it is also the thing that marks her as separate. Maggie has watched this her entire life. She has been present for every dismissal, every moment of isolation, every time Lisa's gifts produced isolation rather than recognition. She has observed the precise cost of being visibly intelligent in Springfield, in this family, in this community. And she has drawn the conclusion that Lisa has not drawn, possibly because Maggie did not have the same vulnerability to the need for recognition that Lisa has, possibly because Maggie's intelligence was great enough to see the game clearly and decide the correct response was to not play it. Silence is power. Invisibility is protection. The less they understand what you are, the more freedom you have to be it. Consider what Maggie's silence has allowed her to accomplish that Lisa's visibility has not. When Burns was shot, the investigation examined every suspect in Springfield except the baby. Because who suspects a baby? Maggie operated completely below the radar of any investigation. When the daycare rebellion needed to be organized, nobody monitored Maggie closely enough to see her doing it. Infants are not assumed to be capable of organizing anything. The assumption itself was her protection. Every moment in which Maggie has intervened decisively, every time her action changed the outcome of a situation that mattered, it happened in the spaces that adults do not watch because they have decided nothing important happens there. And Maggie has maintained those spaces carefully. She has maintained the disguise that grants her access to them. The disguise is perfect because it requires no performance. She is 1 year old. She can fully occupy the appearance of an infant while operating with the interior life of someone who has been watching everything for 36 years and understanding almost all of it. Connect this to the radiation theory and the picture becomes strange in a specific way. If Springfield's contaminated environment produces mutations, and if those mutations are not uniform but differential, varying based on individual biology and degree and timing of exposure, then Homer and Maggie represent opposite extremes of the same spectrum. Homer's mutation diminished him. The radiation, the crayon, the decades of exposure to a contaminated environment built around a nuclear facility with 342 safety violations, all of it combined to reduce a man's cognitive capacity to the minimum consistent with functional survival. Homer is not fully stupid. He has moments of surprising emotional intelligence. He has a capacity for love that the show depicts as genuine and profound. But the analytical machinery, the ability to follow chains of cause and effect, to perceive the structures of his own situation, to ask why things are the way they are, and what could be done about it, that part has been systematically destroyed. Maggie's mutation went the other direction. The same contaminated water, the same irradiated air, the same Springfield atmosphere. In Homer, the exposure hollowed something out. In Maggie, the youngest, the least formed at the point of greatest exposure, something different happened. The mutation amplified. It built instead of destroyed. It created something in her mind that should not exist in a one-year-old body, a cognitive capacity that her physical form cannot fully support, that has been running ahead of her development since the day she was born. Homer and Maggie are the same radiation producing opposite effects. The father diminished to disability. The daughter elevated to something the tests cannot measure. If the coma theory is true, Maggie's genius becomes, depending on how you hold it, the most heartbreaking detail in the entire series. Homer cannot see her grow up. He does not have the information needed to dream her as older or more developed. He only knows Maggie as she was the last day he was conscious, 1 year old, small enough to hold, not yet speaking. So in the dream he gives her something. He gives her a mind that does not need development to be extraordinary. He gives her capability beyond anything her age should allow. He makes her powerful enough to protect herself and others without needing the years she will not have with him to become that person. If Homer is dreaming, Maggie's genius is the most personal thing in the dream. Everything else, the adventures and the adventures of others and the Jas Springfield universe, is generative and creative and elaborate. But Maggie's genius is intimate. It is a specific gift from a sleeping father to the child he cannot watch grow. Her capability is his hope made visible. His belief, pressed into the shape of a baby girl, that she will be okay without him. That she does not need him to become remarkable. That she already is. That is the reading of the coma theory. In the waking world, in whatever version of Springfield is real, Maggie's endgame is the last genuinely open question in the Simpson family. The show has never told us what she is waiting for. It has given us evidence that she is waiting for something. The silence maintained across 36 years. The consistent pattern of acting decisively and then retreating back into invisibility. The intelligence demonstrated in flashes and then carefully concealed. The way the family trusts her judgment implicitly, without ever fully articulating why, as though some part of them senses what she is. She has shot a man. She has led a rebellion. She has saved lives. She has observed everything. She has remembered everything. And she has not spoken a second word. Something is thinking behind that pacifier. Something has been thinking for 36 years, watching the family and the town and the whole broken loop of Springfield from the most advantageous position available, the position of someone that nobody considers a threat because she is too young to be anything else. When Maggie decides to act, when she finally breaks the silence she has maintained with such discipline, Springfield will not see it coming. Nobody will, because that is exactly how she arranged it. Section 7. The future they wrote down first. There is a game the internet plays with The Simpsons, and it has enough players and enough examples at this point that it has become its own genre of online content. Someone finds an episode. The episode contains a joke, an image, a throwaway reference, a piece of background art. The thing in the episode bears a specific resemblance to a real thing that happened later. The clip goes viral. People share it with the same caption that has been attached to these clips for years. The Simpsons predicted it. The show has been on the air for 36 years. It has produced nearly 800 episodes. Each episode contains dozens of jokes, visual gags, satirical observations, background details, and speculative extrapolations about technology, culture, politics, and human nature. When you generate that much content over that span of time, the statistical inevitability of some of it matching future events is not really a mystery. It is arithmetic. But the specific examples that surface are worth spending time with, because some of them are genuinely strange even once you understand the mechanism. And the theory about what the predictions mean, when you take it all the way to where it goes, is more interesting than the predictions themselves. Let us get the famous ones on the table. In the year 2000, the episode Bart to the Future depicted a vision of the future in which Lisa Simpson has become the first female president of the United States. In that future, she is inheriting a massive budget deficit from her predecessor. The predecessor is identified as Donald Trump. The episode aired 16 years before Trump won the 2016 presidential election. The show used Trump as a punchline about the most absurd possible direction American politics could take, a direction in which celebrity and political authority had merged completely, in which the entertainment economy and the power economy were no longer distinguishable. And then American reality moved in exactly that direction. The internet's response was total. Screenshots from the episode circulated everywhere. The Simpsons predicted Trump became one of the most repeated factoids of 2016. People who had not watched the show in decades were suddenly sharing clips and asking variations of the same question. How did they know? In a 1995 episode, the show depicted a device worn on a wrist that receives and displays messages and performs basic communication functions. This was before smartphones, before the iWatch, before any commercially available wearable technology that resembled what the show drew. In a 1994 episode, Homer goes to space, not through some Springfield-specific absurdity. He is selected by NASA, trained, and launched into Earth orbit with Buzz Aldrin. This was years before the commercial space tourism industry began to move from concept toward reality, years before the idea of private citizens going to space became something that could be discussed as a near-term possibility. In 1998, a chalkboard gag in one episode features Homer encountering a mathematical equation. Mathematicians who examined the equation found that it appeared to predict the mass of the Higgs boson particle, which was not confirmed experimentally until 2012. 14 years before the confirmation, the equation was written on a chalkboard in a cartoon. In 1999, in an episode called Homer 3, Homer proposes a theory about the shape of the universe, suggesting it might be toroidal, donut-shaped. Years later, cosmological measurements of cosmic microwave background radiation suggested that the universe might indeed have a toroidal topology. Homer's donut universe was a joke about Homer's obsession with food. It was also apparently a cosmological intuition that took mainstream science another decade and more to arrive at. In 1993, the episode Marge in Chains depicted a flu virus originating in Asia that spreads rapidly to Springfield, causing mass panic, runs on grocery stores and pharmacies, widespread fear, and a frantic international search for a cure or vaccine. The episode aired in 1993. COVID-19 arrived in 2020. 27 years separate the episode from the event, and the parallels in how Springfield responded to the fictional outbreak and how the world responded to the actual one were noted by millions of people simultaneously. During the chaos of the fictional Springfield outbreak, a side incident involved the accidental release of a swarm of killer bees. During the actual 2020 pandemic, media coverage briefly fixated on the appearance of Asian giant hornets in the Pacific Northwest, immediately dubbed murder hornets. The overlap between the fictional episode and the real year was not complete, but it was specific enough that the coincidence moved from amusing to genuinely strange. In 1996, the show made a joke about the hip-hop group Cypress Hill accidentally booking the London Symphony Orchestra for a performance. 28 years later, in 2024, Cypress Hill performed with the London Symphony Orchestra at the Royal Albert Hall. The joke became a real concert, more than 2 decades after the joke was written. In 1998, the show depicted in passing a fictional entertainment conglomerate acquiring the network that owned Fox. In 2019, Disney acquired 21st Century Fox, including the network that broadcasts The Simpsons. The show that made the joke became the show that was acquired in the joke's premise. The list continues. Video calling, depicted years before FaceTime. Autocorrect errors, depicted before autocorrect existed in the form we know it. Surveillance culture, the casual monitoring of ordinary people through their devices, depicted before the infrastructure for it was in place. Drone warfare, electronic voting irregularities, a specific kind of financial crime, a specific sporting outcome. The list is long enough to sustain multiple articles and videos and heated discussions and will continue generating new entries for as long as the show continues and the world continues to produce events. The official explanation from the people who make The Simpsons is measured and consistent and probably correct about most of the cases. Al Jean, who has been running the show for most of its history, has a version of this answer he has given in multiple interviews. If you throw enough darts, some of them will hit the target. 800 episodes, thousands of jokes, decades of content. The arithmetic of that output virtually guarantees that some portion of it will correspond to future events through coincidence alone. This is not mysticism. This is probability. Bill Oakley, one of the showrunners during the strongest period of the series' run, has been even more direct. Most of what gets called prediction is coincidence and the recycling of historical patterns. History does not repeat exactly, but it rhymes often enough that content from 30 years ago can resemble content from today without any supernatural mechanism being required. Fact-checking organizations that have investigated the most popular prediction claims have found that the vast majority have straightforward explanations. The Trump prediction did not require anyone to see the future. Trump had been publicly discussing running for president since the late 1980s. The Simpsons writing room, staffed by some of the most observant and analytically capable people in television, looked at a man with an enormous public profile, a brand built on performed wealth and success, and a decades-long flirtation with political ambition, and asked, "What is the logical extreme of this trajectory?" The joke wrote itself. The Disney-Fox prediction did not require prophecy. The 1990s were a period of aggressive media consolidation. Major entertainment companies were growing larger and absorbing competitors at an accelerating rate. The Simpsons writers looked at the trend and pushed it forward to its logical conclusion. The joke was not a prediction. It was a satirical extrapolation that the industry eventually caught up to. The smartwatch was not prophetic. Technology was miniaturizing visibly and rapidly throughout the 1990s. The trajectory from the devices that existed then to a wrist-mounted computer was short enough that a thoughtful observer writing a joke about it was not making an imaginative leap. They were following a visible arc. The Simpsons writing staff has historically been one of the most formally educated in American television. Multiple members hold advanced degrees from elite universities. Several have serious academic backgrounds in mathematics, hard science, computer science, and political theory. They are not making random guesses. They are highly intelligent, well-read observers of American culture who spend their professional lives studying trends, reading widely, thinking carefully, and then asking, if this continues, where does it go? They are not predicting the future. They are reading the present more carefully than most people do. But then there are the cases that resist the comfortable explanation. The Trump prediction named Trump specifically. Not a generic celebrity politician. Trump. And the episode included an image of him descending an escalator that has been noted to bear a visual resemblance to the announcement he made in 2015 at Trump Tower, which included an actual escalator descent. The specific detail, the escalator, the name, the combination of them, produces something that the volume and probability explanation handles less cleanly. The Siegfried and Roy episode did not merely suggest that exotic animal performers might be injured by their animals. It depicted a white tiger attacking one of the two performers during a show. In 2003, Roy Horn was critically injured when one of the act's white tigers turned on him during a live performance. The species, the context, the nature of the attack, specifics that move beyond the comfortable reach of statistical coincidence. The Higgs boson equation was not a general joke about physics. It was a specific mathematical expression that, when examined by people with the relevant expertise, bore a genuine resemblance to a real prediction in particle physics. These cases are where the standard debunking feels insufficient, not because the volume and probability explanation is wrong in general, but because it cannot fully account for the level of specificity in these particular cases. This is where the meta-theory becomes worth taking seriously. The Simpsons does not predict the future. The Simpsons shapes it. The show has been embedded in American cultural life for 36 years. It has been one of the most watched pieces of media in the country for most of that time. Its observations, its jokes, its satirical frames have become reference points that people use when making sense of the world. Its vocabulary has entered common usage. Its scenarios have entered the cultural imagination. When The Simpsons makes a joke about Trump becoming president, that joke does not disappear. It enters the cultural bloodstream. Millions of people see it, share it, remember it, reference it. The idea of a Trump presidency becomes something the culture has already processed, already imagined, already filed away as a possibility that has been examined even if only in satirical form. When the idea moves from joke to reality, the cultural response is not pure shock. It is recognition mixed with shock. We have been here before. We have seen this. The Simpsons did this 20 years ago. The show primes the cultural imagination for specific futures by depicting them first, even as jokes. It makes certain outcomes feel less unthinkable by having thought them. And when those outcomes eventually materialize, the prior cultural exposure shapes the response. Not a surprise. As a resigned, complicated, Simpsons has something to say about this recognition. The show did not predict the Disney acquisition of Fox. The show made media consolidation feel like the inevitable logic of the industry, and when consolidation happened at that specific scale, the cultural response was, "Of course, we already knew this was coming." The Simpsons told us, the show does not reflect America. In some meaningful sense, America has been drifting toward Springfield. The show held up a mirror for 36 years. A mirror that showed a contaminated community, a corrupt billionaire, an incompetent government, a population too distracted and too cognitively compromised to perceive its own situation clearly. And we looked at that mirror long enough that we began to recognize elements of it in the world around us. Not because the show predicted that, because the show described the tendencies, and the tendencies followed their own logic forward. The predictions that did not come true are the part nobody talks about. There are hundreds of them, possibly thousands. Jokes about technologies that never arrived. Jokes about political outcomes that went differently. Jokes about cultural trends that peaked and reversed. Futures that The Simpsons wrote down that the world simply declined to produce. Nobody screenshots those. Nobody builds a viral post around the time The Simpsons predicted jetpacks and the jetpacks did not appear. Nobody makes a video about The Simpsons episode where the future went a different direction. Because confirmation bias is a one-way mechanism. We remember what fits. We discard what does not. We filter 800 episodes of content through the lens of looking for the hits, and the result is a highlight reel that looks like prophecy. The show produced so many possible futures that some of them were always going to arrive. The ones that arrived are the ones that get remembered. The ones that did not arrive are not evidence of the show's fallibility. They are simply the majority of the output, quietly filed away and forgotten. But even knowing all of that, even understanding the full mechanism of why the predictions feel prophetic when most of them are coincidence, and most of the non-coincidences are careful extrapolation, the experience of watching a clip from 1994 describe something that happened last week is still genuinely unsettling. Not because of what it suggests about the show, because of what it suggests about the world the show has been describing. If the show keeps predicting things not because it sees the future, but because it describes the present so accurately that the present has nowhere to go except toward what was described, then maybe the predictions are less impressive and more sobering than they first appear. Maybe the show has not been writing the future. Maybe it has been diagnosing the present all along, and we are all just living inside the diagnosis. Section 8. The Mother Who Had to Disappear. For the first 6 seasons of The Simpsons, Homer's mother was dead. That was the established fact, settled and unquestioned, part of the background architecture of who Homer Simpson was. His father Abe was alive, distant, a source of guilt and obligation and occasional warmth. His mother was gone. Abe had told Homer when Homer was a child that his mother had died, and he had shown Homer a grave to prove it, and Homer had grown up with the fact of that loss as part of his foundation. Everything about Homer's emotional life is organized around that loss, his desperate, sometimes embarrassing need for approval. The way he clings to people who show him kindness, overcorrecting for a lifetime of feeling insufficient. His terror of abandonment, which surfaces in unexpected moments throughout the series, quiet but insistent. His willingness to absorb years of being forgotten by his own employer rather than seeking something different, because seeking something different means risking the thing he already has, and the thing he already has is the only anchor he has ever trusted. Homer Simpson is, at his emotional core, a man who grew up believing he was the kind of son a mother would rather die than stay for. That belief was placed in him when he was too young to question it. It shaped every choice he made afterward. In Season 7, the show revealed that the belief was a lie. The episode is called Mother Simpson. It aired on the 19th of November, 1995, and it is consistently ranked among the finest 30 minutes the show ever produced. Not because of the comedy, though the comedy is present. Because of the emotional honesty, which is something the show does not always give itself permission to attempt. Homer fakes his own death to get out of a mandatory Saturday work assignment. He pushes a dummy off a cliff near the plant. The town believes he has died. The administrative consequence of being legally dead requires Marge to insist he go to the Hall of Records and correct the error. At the Hall of Records, Homer encounters something in the municipal files that rewrites the ground truth of his existence. According to the official records, his mother is alive. There is no death certificate. The grave Abe showed him does not belong to Homer's mother. It belongs to Walt Whitman, the poet. Abe Simpson had been using a famous writer's headstone as a stand-in for decades, had been pointing to it when the subject came up, had been maintaining the fiction of his wife's death using borrowed marble. Homer finds Mona at a cemetery. She has heard that her son has died, and she has come to the grave that was supposed to be his. She does not recognize him at first. He has aged, he has become someone different from the small child she left. But he proves who he is, and what follows is one of the most genuinely moving scenes the show has ever allowed itself. A grown man and the mother he was told was dead, finding each other beside a headstone that belongs to neither of them. 36 years of the show, and this episode, this scene, remains one of the handful of moments where the comedy drops away completely and what is left is something real. And then Mona tells him the truth. The story begins in 1969. Mona Simpson was a housewife, married to Abe, mother to a young Homer, living a quiet, ordinary life in Springfield during a period when the world outside was anything but quiet. The civil rights movement, the anti-war movement, the counterculture. The 1960s were burning through every institution that had seemed permanent. And even in a town like Springfield, the heat reached people. Mona was changed by it. The show depicts this with the broad strokes it tends to use for political history, but the emotional core is genuine. She found a cause. She found a community. She joined a group of activists who were targeting something that, when you understand what it was, changes the entire architecture of the conspiracy this theory is built on. Mr. Burns owned a biological weapons laboratory, not a nuclear power plant, not an energy facility, a germ warfare laboratory, a facility designed to develop and manufacture weaponized pathogens, located in Springfield, the same town where he would later build the nuclear reactor with 342 safety violations, the same town where Homer Simpson was growing up and children were playing in the streets and families were going about their lives with no knowledge that the wealthiest man in town was cultivating diseases in a building down the road from the school. Mona and her group broke into the laboratory. They detonated a device designed to destroy the biological agents stored inside. In the chaos of the operation, they accidentally cured the asthma of the facility's security guard, a young man named Clancy Wiggum, who would later become the police chief of Springfield. The raid succeeded. The pathogens were destroyed. But as the group was fleeing, Mona made a mistake that was entirely consistent with who she was and entirely fatal to the life she was returning to. Someone had been knocked down in the chaos of the escape. Mona turned back. She helped them up. The person she helped was Mr. Burns. He saw her face. He recognized her. He reported her to the FBI. And from that moment, Mona Simpson became a federal fugitive, unable to return home, unable to contact her family, unable to explain to Homer why she was leaving because explaining it would have put Homer and Abe in danger. She kissed her son goodbye in the middle of the night while he slept, not knowing it was the last time she would hold him for more than 2 decades. Homer woke up and his mother was gone. And Abe, for reasons the show eventually explores, told his son that she had died rather than tell him the truth. Burns did not simply identify Mona to the FBI and consider the matter resolved. He pursued her, actively, personally, for decades. When Mona returns to Springfield in this episode, Burns recognizes her. Through a car window, in passing, he sees a woman he encountered for seconds in a chaotic situation in 1969 and identifies her immediately. He calls the authorities. The FBI arrives at the Simpson house. Mona has to run again. Homer, who has had his mother back for days, who has sat with her and talked with her and felt something settle in him that he has been missing his entire life, has to say goodbye again. And here is the connection the show makes without underlining it. Homer works for Burns. He has worked for Burns his entire adult life. He earns his paycheck from the man who drove his mother into exile. He goes to that man's plant every morning. He takes that man's money every week. He has spent his adult life inside an institution owned by the person responsible for the most significant damage in his personal history. And he does not connect these facts. He does not confront Burns. He does not quit. He does not stand in his employer's office and name what was done to his family. He goes back to work. This is not played as comedy. The show knows the weight of it. Homer's inability to make the connection, to follow the line from his own suffering back to its source, is not a joke about his intelligence. It is a portrait of what the damage has actually done. Homer is not smart enough to see the architecture of his own suffering. He lives inside it without being able to perceive its shape. The conspiracy the show constructs across multiple episodes is not subtle once you see it. Burns did not just ruin Mona's life. He engineered Homer's. He took Homer's mother when Homer was 6 years old, ensuring that Homer would grow up with the specific emotional damage that makes him, of all the possible employees in the world, exactly the kind of person Burns needed in Sector 7G. A man desperate for approval, who will endure being forgotten year after year because the alternative, making himself unwanted, is a fear too deep to act against. A man who clings to the stability he has rather than risking it for something better. A man incapable of sustaining the kind of critical thinking that would allow him to look at his employer and understand what his employer has done. A man who, even when he reaches moments of intelligence and clarity, retreats from them because the clarity is too painful to sustain. Homer does not work at the nuclear power plant because he lacks better options. He works there because Burns, through the act of exiling his mother when Homer was a child, created a version of Homer that would always come back, that would always stay, that would absorb the forgotten name and the inadequate salary and the constant proximity to physical danger and keep showing up because showing up is the only version of belonging Homer has ever known how to perform. The show confirms this structure in a later episode when it reveals that Burns struck a deal with Grandpa Simpson. Burns had committed a crime. Grandpa had knowledge of it. In exchange for Grandpa's silence, Burns guaranteed Homer's permanent employment at the plant. No termination, no matter how many violations, no matter how many errors. 742 of them, documented, and not one resulting in permanent dismissal. Homer's job security was never a narrative convenience. It was a contractual obligation between his grandfather and his mother's persecutor. A deal made in secret and never explained to Homer, because explaining it would require explaining everything else, and everything else is the whole story of how one man's grudge against a woman who tried to do the right thing rippled forward through 3 generations and produced a broken man sitting in a contaminated power plant and calling it his life. Mona fought against Burns's biological weapons program and lost her family for it. Grandpa discovered Burns's crimes and traded his silence for his son's livelihood. Homer inherited the consequences and never understood why. 3 generations of Simpsons, shaped by one man's determination to punish a woman who helped him up off the floor when she should have kept running. Mona Simpson died in a later season. The death scene is quiet. It does not reach for comedy. It does not deflect into absurdity. Homer sits beside his mother. He holds her hand. He watches the woman he barely knew, whose choices and sacrifices shaped everything about him without his ever being told what they were, slip away. No reset, no recovery. Just the weight of 27 stolen years, pressing down on both of them until only one is left. The Simpsons is a comedy. It has been a comedy for 36 years. The jokes are good. Many of them are great. The show at its best is one of the finest works of American popular culture. But underneath every joke, underneath every act of Homer's incompetence and every reset and every fresh start, this is the story the show has been telling. A family systematically taken apart by one man's power. A woman who tried to do the right thing and paid for it with her family. A son who inherited the damage and could never understand where it came from. A grandfather who made a deal with the devil and called it protecting his family. Burns won. Burns always wins in Springfield. Because in Springfield, the man with the money writes the rules. And the rules say Homer Simpson will work at the power plant until he dies. Because his grandfather made a deal. Because his mother made a choice. Because the richest man in town needed a broken man in Sector 7G, and Homer was broken before he ever clocked in. Section 9. The town that isn't on any map. Springfield is the most famous fictional town in American history. More people could find it on a map than can find the actual capitals of half the states in the country, which is a fact that says something about the show and something about American geography education and something about how our minds hold fictional places alongside real ones, as though there is no meaningful distinction. It has a nuclear power plant and a tire fire that has been burning for 30 years and a gorge where things fall, and a harbor and a monorail that a con man built, and a quick mart and a tavern and an elementary school with a music program that keeps losing its funding and a retirement home and 2 hospitals and a prison, and apparently an active volcano somewhere in the surrounding landscape. It also has coastline, and mountains, and desert terrain, and dense forest, and farmland that extends in multiple directions depending on the episode. And at various points in the show's run, it has been established to border Ohio, Nevada, Maine, and Kentucky, sometimes in the same breath, sometimes in consecutive episodes that treat these contradictions as though they do not exist. Springfield has weather that ranges from full blizzard conditions to tropical heat waves within the span of a single season. It is on the coast. It is also inland. It is near the Canadian border. It is also near Mexico. No town in the United States has all of these geographic features simultaneously. No state contains all of the climates that Springfield has been depicted as containing. The show has been actively, deliberately, almost gleefully contradicting itself about Springfield's location for its entire run, and it has been doing so for 36 years, with enough commitment that the contradiction has become the most consistent thing about the question. The creator of the show, Matt Groening, addressed this in a 2012 interview. He said he named the town after Springfield, Oregon, where he grew up. He chose the name because Springfield is one of the most common city names in America, appearing in dozens of states, and because the familiarity of the name would prevent anyone from being able to pin the show to a specific location. He named a fictional town after a real town with the specific intention that the name would be too generic to serve as geographic evidence. For about 2 days, this was treated as the definitive answer. Springfield was in Oregon, case closed. And then the show kept contradicting itself. Episodes aired after the interview that placed Springfield in geographic contexts completely inconsistent with Oregon. The writers did not treat Groening's admission as a resolution of the mystery. They kept the ambiguity operational. They continued placing Springfield in impossible geographic positions with the same casual consistency they had always used, because the mystery was never an accident. The mystery of Springfield's location is not a byproduct of a creative team that could not coordinate their geographic references. It is a deliberate, sustained 36-year creative choice. And the choice is the point. The surface explanation for this choice is one the show's creators have offered themselves. Springfield is designed to be universal. Every American viewer, regardless of where they actually live, should be able to look at Springfield and see something of their own community. The town's geographic impossibility is what makes this possible. By refusing to anchor Springfield to a specific state or climate or coastline, the writers ensured that the town could feel simultaneously like the Rust Belt and the Sun Belt and small-town New England and the suburban Midwest. It is every American town at once because it is no specific American town in particular. This is a real design philosophy, and it works. Part of why The Simpsons resonates across such a wide range of American viewers is that Springfield does not feel like someone else's town. It feels like a composite of things each viewer knows, assembled into something that belongs to everyone and no one specifically. But under the lens of the theories we have been building, this explanation is only the beginning. If the radiation theory is true, if the power plant has been fundamentally altering the biological reality of Springfield for decades, then why should the alteration stop at biology? The same logic that allows residents to have 4 fingers and survive fatal injuries and fail to age should apply to the physical landscape around them. Physics in Springfield is demonstrably different from physics elsewhere. Time works differently. Biology works differently. The ordinary rules of the physical world are negotiable within Springfield's borders in ways they are not negotiable anywhere else. Why should geography be the one exception? Perhaps Springfield has both mountains and coastline because the contamination does not only affect living things. Perhaps the radiation that has warped the biology of the town's residents has also warped the space around the town, compressing geographic features that should be hundreds of miles apart into a single impossible region. The same mutation that gave Homer an impossible healing rate, and gave Maggie an impossible intelligence, and gave every resident of Springfield 4 fingers, may have given the town itself an impossible geography. A contamination zone where the ordinary rules of physical space are as negotiable as the ordinary rules of biological development. If the coma theory is true, Springfield's geography takes on a quality that is both more explicable and more melancholy. Homer's dreaming brain does not have a precise geographic atlas. It has impressions, fragments of sensory memory from every place Homer ever visited or drove through or saw on television or heard described. Mountains from a family vacation he half remembers. Ocean from a commercial that played during a show he was watching before he went under. Desert from a movie he saw once. Farmland from the long, boring middle of a cross-country drive. His unconscious mind assembled Springfield from all of it. It layered geographic features without any concern for cartographic logic, because dreams do not operate on cartographic logic. Dreams operate on emotional logic. They place things where they feel right, where they carry the weight the dream needs them to carry. The ocean is close because Homer once stood at the ocean and felt something. The mountains are visible on the horizon because mountains meant something to him once. Springfield does not have a fixed location because it is not a real place. It is a feeling, given a shape. It is the emotional residue of everywhere Homer has ever been, pressed together into a single, impossible town that could be anywhere because it is made of everywhere. That is why Springfield feels like your town no matter where you grew up. Because it is not anyone's specific town. It is everyone's composite impression of what American townness feels like, assembled from fragments and held together not by geography but by longing. Here is the dimension of the geographic ambiguity that the discussion rarely pauses on long enough. You cannot regulate a town you cannot locate. You cannot bring federal charges against a nuclear facility if the state it is located in is undefined. Environmental protection law in the United States is organized by state and by EPA region. If Springfield's location is genuinely ambiguous, if it borders 4 different states depending on the episode, then the jurisdictional question of which state's attorney general has authority over its nuclear plant, which EPA regional office is responsible for its water quality compliance, which federal district court would hear charges related to its environmental violations, is not merely an academic question, it is a shield. Burns's plant has 342 safety violations. The estimated remediation cost was $56 million, which Burns refused to pay. The plant has been dumping radioactive waste into local waterways. The town has been classified as a federal environmental hazard, serious enough to justify containment under a dome, and nobody has successfully prosecuted any of it. Nobody has forced compliance. Nobody has shut the plant down. Springfield floats between states because floating is safer than landing. Landing means a specific jurisdiction, a specific regulatory authority, a specific law enforcement agency that has clear, unambiguous, legally uncontestable authority to pursue what has happened in this town. As long as Springfield has no fixed location, it has no fixed accountability. The violations keep happening. The contamination keeps spreading. And the legal framework that should constrain it keeps failing to attach because the town it should attach to keeps moving. The geographic impossibility is not a joke. It is a liability shield. It is the last and most elegant mechanism by which Burns's empire protects itself from the consequences it deserves. In the episode Behind the Laughter, the 12th season mockumentary that treats the Simpson family as a real family being profiled, the show gave Springfield a definitive location. In the original broadcast, the family was identified as being from northern Kentucky. In syndicated reruns, that identification was changed. A different state replaced Kentucky in the same line. The same episode, the same scene, the same moment of apparent geographic resolution, with a different answer depending on which version you are watching. The show gave you the answer and changed the answer based on the platform. The location is different depending on whether you are watching it on original broadcast or on cable or in syndication. The one moment of apparent resolution was designed to resolve differently depending on who was watching and when. Even when Springfield appears to have a location, the location is not stable. It mutates between versions. It refuses to be pinned. The show will not let the mystery resolve, even in the episodes that appear to resolve it. Every state in the Union has been proposed as Springfield's home at various points. Fan communities have built elaborate cases for specific states using the accumulated geographic evidence across the series. None of them works completely. Every case that can be made for one state contains evidence that contradicts it from another episode. The show has generated enough contradictory information that the mystery has become self-sustaining. It cannot be solved because the evidence for every possible answer is equally valid and equally undermined. The show has been doing this deliberately. It has been seeding contradictions for decades, not carelessly but with the specific purpose of ensuring that no answer can stick. Springfield will never be located. Not because the creative team could not decide, because the creative team decided long ago that the town is worth more as an unsolved mystery than as a pinned location. A town that could be anywhere belongs to everyone. A town that belongs to everyone cannot be shut down. And perhaps that is the deepest function of the geographic ambiguity. Not the legal shield. Not the universal relatability. The simple, democratic truth that a place that exists everywhere exists for everyone. Springfield is not a place with a zip code and a state flag. Springfield is wherever you are right now, in the specific way that the American experience of community, with all its warmth and all its denial and all its ability to look at a three-eyed fish and shrug, has shaped the place you come from. It is everyone's town. That is why it cannot be located. You cannot put a pin in something that is already everywhere. Section 10. Why nobody ages and what that costs. Bart Simpson was 10 years old on the 17th of December, 1989. He is 10 years old now, as you read this, as I narrate this. As the show airs somewhere in the world tonight, he will be 10 years old in every episode that will ever be made. The number is fixed. It will not change. Lisa was 8 then. She is 8 now. Maggie was 1. Homer and Marge were somewhere in their mid-30s. 36 years have passed in the real world. 0 have passed in Springfield. The industry term for this is a floating timeline. The show's present is always the viewer's present. When the episode airs in 2025, the characters live in 2025. When it aired in 1995, they lived in 1995. The world around them updates. The technology, the cultural references, the events they react to, but the characters themselves do not update. They remain at the ages they were given when the show began. Most long-running animated series do this. The format makes it practical. Characters age in live-action television because actors age and there is no way around it. Animation has no such constraint. You can keep Bart at 10 for as long as the show runs, and the show has run long enough that the phrase "as long as the show runs" no longer has a visible endpoint. For most of the show's history, this was accepted as a convention, a harmless one. Something you noticed and shrugged at because the stories were good enough that you were willing to meet the format on its own terms. But the show has been running long enough now that the floating timeline has started producing contradictions that cannot be dismissed as harmless. The arithmetic no longer works. The backstory keeps collapsing. The past keeps needing to be revised to keep the present coherent. And what was once a production convenience has become the most fundamental and inescapable feature of Springfield's impossible reality. The most obvious problem is Homer and Marge's history and how it has changed. When the show began, their backstory was anchored to the late 1970s and early 1980s. They met in high school during that era. Their courtship was set in that specific period, with the music and the fashion and the cultural atmosphere of those years. Homer's hair in the flashbacks, Marge's prom dress, the cars, the television they watched, all of it belonged to a time that made arithmetic sense for parents in their mid-30s in 1989. But the floating timeline dragged the present forward, year by year, and the backstory had to move with it. If Homer and Marge are still in their mid-30s in 2010, they cannot have met in 1978. The math fails. So the flashback episodes revise the setting. Their high school years moved from the late 1970s to the mid-1980s, then to the 1990s, then to the 2000s. Their formative years, the era they came of age in, the cultural context that shaped them, has been rewritten at least 4 times to keep the arithmetic from becoming completely absurd. The love story is the same. Homer sees Marge for the first time and something happens. They find their way to each other through difficulty and uncertainty and the particular kind of stubbornness that the show has always associated with love that is real. That core is consistent across every version. but the era surrounding it keeps shifting, because the era has to shift to keep the current episode's math from breaking. Homer and Marge do not have a fixed history. They have a composite, a series of approximations, each one valid for the season in which it appeared, each one quietly superseded by the next revision. Their origin story has become a document that the show keeps rewriting, not because the writers are careless about it, but because the structure of the show demands it. There is something quietly devastating about this when you look at it directly. Homer and Marge's love story is one of the most consistent and genuinely touching elements of the series. The show has returned to it hundreds of times across 36 years, and every version of the return confirms the same thing. These two people chose each other, and the choosing mattered, and it still matters. The love is real, but the context for how they found each other keeps changing. The memories that should anchor the love story to a specific time and place are not stable. They are revised every few years to fit the current timeline, which means Homer and Marge's shared history is not a fixed thing they can hold. It is a document in constant revision. If the coma theory is true, this is the most direct evidence of the dream's limitations. Homer's brain cannot remember exactly when things happened. It can remember that they happened. It can remember the feeling, the texture, the emotional truth of falling in love with Marge. But the year, the specific era, the details that would anchor the memory to a moment in real time, those are beyond what a deteriorating mind can maintain. So the dream revises the backdrop every few years to make it feel current, to make the memory feel present rather than historical. The love is fixed. The frame keeps shifting because the mind generating it no longer knows exactly when it happened, only that it did. The show has imagined its characters aging. It has done this more than once, with real care, and the results are always affecting in ways that the ordinary episodes do not quite achieve. Season 6, Episode 19, Lisa's Wedding. The show flashes forward to a future in which Lisa is 23 years old, engaged to a young man named Hugh, living a life that is recognizably continuous with who she is now. The episode is detailed. Lisa has become the person the show has always been building toward. Intelligent, principled, a little lonely in the specific way of very smart people, seeking the kind of understanding that only certain people can offer. The flash forward is beautiful. It is built from genuine knowledge of who Lisa is. It shows her as someone who has grown up and remained herself, which is both the hope and the difficulty of being Lisa Simpson. She has not been broken by the world. She has been shaped by it into something that retains what was most essential about her from the beginning. And then the episode ends and Lisa is 8 years old again. The show made a portrait of Lisa's future with evident love and evident craft. And then it put it away. The flash forward is a single episode, a question asked and answered and then unasked. Lisa returns to being 8. The future is closed. The permanent present resumes. The show can imagine growth. It refuses to allow it. This is not a production limitation. The writers know who these characters would be at older ages. They have demonstrated this repeatedly in flash-forward episodes and alternate timeline episodes and dream sequences. They can do it. They choose not to. Now apply all 4 of the major theories simultaneously and watch them converge. The coma theory. Nobody ages because they exist inside the frozen mind of a man who went under in April 1993. Homer's unconscious cannot generate his children getting older because he was not there to watch them do it. The ages are fixed at the moment the dream began. The radiation theory. Nobody ages because the biological mechanisms of aging have been disrupted by decades of chronic radiation exposure. The contamination from the plant has altered the cellular processes that would normally move the residents through time. The principle and the pauper theory. Nobody ages because Springfield collectively agrees to ignore the passage of time, the same way it agreed to ignore the truth about Skinner. The aging problem is not a physical fact. It is a community decision. Springfield voted to stay still. The Burns immortality theory. Aging is already negotiable in this universe. A sufficiently wealthy person has already purchased their way out of normal biological time. If Burns can sustain his lifespan for a century and more through artificial means, the concept of aging as a universal human experience has already been quietly voided for at least one Springfield resident. And what is possible for one may be possible for all, in different ways, through different mechanisms. Every single theory arrives at the same structural conclusion through a different path. Time does not work in Springfield the way it works anywhere else. Something has broken the normal flow of time inside this town's borders, and the show has been documenting the evidence since the first episode. Here is the larger argument the floating timeline is making, beneath the production convention, beneath the theories, at the level of what the show is actually doing in American culture. The Simpsons is the American family. It has held this position for longer than any other fictional household in the history of the medium. For 36 years, it has been the dominant cultural image of what a certain kind of American family looks like, what it argues about, what it loves, how it fails, how it survives. And the American family, as the show has constructed it, cannot be allowed to change. Homer must remain middle-aged, Marge must remain patient, Bart must remain the rebellious child, Lisa must remain the idealist, Maggie must remain an infant. The dynamic must hold. The structure must be preserved. Not for production reasons, though the production reasons are real. For cultural reasons. The moment Bart turns 11, he is leaving childhood. The moment Lisa turns 9, she is 1 year closer to the day she moves out. The moment Maggie speaks her second word, the mystery ends. The moment Homer retires, the power plant loses its incompetent safety inspector and Burns loses his shield. The moment Marge is alone in the house on Evergreen Terrace with her children grown and gone, the show is not a comedy, it is an elegy. It is the story of people who ran out of time. America does not want that story, or rather, America is not ready to hear it from these specific people. The Simpsons represents something that we need to be permanent. Not this family specifically, but what they stand for. The chaotic, functional, loving, infuriating, resilient American household. The family that fights and forgives and falls apart and pulls together and somehow keeps going. We need them to keep going indefinitely, because if they stop, we have to admit that everything stops. The floating timeline is the show's commitment to a promise, not a logical promise, an emotional one. We will still be here. The family will be intact. The couch will be the same couch. Homer will still be Homer. In a world where nothing stays in place, Springfield stays. The loop in the end is not their prison. It is ours. We built it. Not the writers, not the production company. We built it by watching, by returning every week, by making the show a fixture of our lives for decades until the fixture itself became something we could not imagine removing. Every time we watch, every time we laugh at a joke that aired before some of us were born, we make the loop a little tighter. We make it harder for The Simpsons to escape, because escape would mean ending, and ending would mean admitting something we have been deferring for 36 years. It would mean admitting that the couch we sat on as children while watching the opening credits is somewhere else now, or in someone else's house, or in a landfill. It would mean admitting that the years that have passed since the show began are real years that have changed us and the world has moved. It would mean pressing play on a timeline that we paused in 1989 and have never quite been willing to restart. And so the loop holds. Bart is 10, Lisa is 8, Maggie still has her pacifier, Homer still drives to the plant. And every week the couch gag plays and the family assembles and the credits roll and Springfield is exactly where we left it. Because that is what Springfield is. Not a town, not a fictional setting, a place we built inside ourselves, assembled from years of watching, held there not by cartoon logic or production convention, but by the specifically human need for something that does not end. The Simpsons are frozen in time because we needed them to be, and they always will be, for as long as we keep watching. Section 11. The Man Who Dies and the Man Who Can't Win. There are two characters at the edges of the theories we have been exploring tonight who deserve attention in their own right, because each of them illuminates something the show has been doing quietly for decades. One of them has died more times than any other character in the history of American animation. The other has done everything correctly for 36 years and received almost nothing for it. Hans Moleman, Ned Flanders, the background tragedy and the foreground one. Hans Moleman is the small, elderly, nearly blind man who appears throughout the series in background scenes and crowd shots. He wears very thick glasses. He walks with a shuffle. He has the permanent demeanor of someone who has come to accept that something unfortunate is about to happen and has developed a resigned relationship with that expectation. He is, by any reasonable estimate, the most frequently killed character in the history of American animation. Not in Halloween specials, not in dream sequences, in regular, canonical episodes. Molman gets hit by cars. He is crushed by objects falling from heights. He is buried alive. He is eaten by animals in circumstances the show does not always fully explain. He is struck by lightning. He is incinerated. He walks into traffic and disappears under wheels. He is launched from things and lands badly. He drowns. He is compressed. He falls. He is attacked by various creatures. He was once sat on by an elephant. He dies. Definitively apparently on screen. And in the next episode, he is present in a crowd scene, alive, fine, ready for the cycle to begin again. No explanation. No resurrection arc. No acknowledgement that 2 episodes ago this person was dead. Most viewers accept this as a running gag, which is what it is on the surface. Molman dies a lot. It is funny. The show does not expect you to think about it. But under the theories we have been building, Moleman is genuinely strange. Because what the show depicts is not merely a character who survives fatal injuries. Homer survives fatal injuries. Homer's survival involves his body absorbing damage and continuing to function. What Molman does is different. He actually dies. His death is depicted as death, not as injury. And then he comes back. The radiation theory has a specific reading for Molman that it does not have for any other character. If Springfield's contaminated environment produces biological mutations, and if those mutations are not uniform across the population, and if different individuals develop different adaptations depending on their specific biology and their specific pattern of exposure, then Molman may represent the most extreme radioactive alteration the town has produced. A body that can reconstitute itself after fatal trauma. Not accelerated healing. Not unusually robust physiology. Actual biological death, followed by biological restoration. A man who dies and returns, not through cartoon resilience, but through something the radiation has done to his cellular structure that no medical literature has a category for. Death in Springfield, for at least one resident, is a temporary condition. A physiological event that the body performs and recovers from the way other bodies recover from illness, given enough time between episodes. If that is what the radiation produces at its most extreme, if the same contamination that gave Homer's body its impossible healing rate has given Molman's body the ability to survive death itself, then Springfield's contamination zone is doing something to its longest exposed, most thoroughly saturated residents that the Springfield Files episode only hinted at. There is one detail about Molman that the show placed in a single episode and never returned to. It sits in the narrative archive of the show like a stone that nobody quite knows what to do with. Hans Moleman once stated his age as 31 years old. 31. He appears to be in his 80s or 90s. His skin is papery and deeply lined. His posture has collapsed. His vision is so poor that extremely thick corrective lenses are insufficient, and he still cannot navigate effectively. He looks like a man who has lived through approximately 9 difficult decades. He says he is 31, if he is telling the truth. If this is not a gag but a genuine piece of character information that the show placed there with intention, then something aged Hans Moleman catastrophically. Something took a young man in the early stages of adulthood and transformed his body into what appears to be advanced old age in a fraction of the time that process should require. The radiation theory has an answer for this. Acute radiation exposure in youth, severe enough to accelerate the physical processes of aging dramatically, while simultaneously triggering whatever mutation has made his body capable of restoring itself after death. His appearance is the cost of the mutation. His apparent indestructibility is the mutation itself. He looks ancient because the thing that made him unkillable also made him old before his time. If the coma theory is true, Molman is something simpler. He is a background process. A supporting character that Homer's dreaming brain does not invest enough resources in to maintain consistently. He dies when the dream does not need him, and returns when the scene requires population. He is not a person in the dream. He is furniture. He is Homer's unconscious mind filling out the crowd. If Springfield's collective denial theory applies, Molman's deaths are one more thing the town has agreed to normalize. A man dies publicly, repeatedly, in front of witnesses, and nobody calls an ambulance, or asks how he keeps coming back, or wonders if something might be done. The town has filed Hans Molman in the same mental category as the three-eyed fish and the glowing billionaire. One more thing too complicated to address. One more thing to walk past without looking at too closely. Now, Ned Flanders, who is the character the show has quietly, systematically, and comprehensively destroyed more thoroughly than any villain or any tragedy it has ever deliberately constructed. On the surface, Ned is Homer's opposite: kind where Homer is thoughtless, generous where Homer is selfish, devout where Homer is irreverent, physically healthy, financially responsible, a good father, a good neighbor, an active participant in his community, a man who has maintained a consistent moral framework across 3.5 decades. The show punishes him for it without pause. Homer's selfishness killed Ned's wife. This is not a metaphor or an approximation. Maud Flanders died at the Springfield Speedway when a t-shirt cannon misfired and struck her at height, knocking her from the stands. The cannon fired at Homer. Homer dodged. The shirts that should have hit Homer hit Maud instead. Homer's reflexive self-preservation killed the person Ned loved most. And Ned forgave him. Because Ned always forgives. Because Ned has no mechanism for sustained anger. Because Ned's brain was rewired in childhood to suppress precisely the response that the situation deserved. That rewiring is where Ned's story becomes something more than a portrait of a good man in a bad situation. When a hurricane destroys Ned's house and the community attempts to rebuild it, the result is structurally so compromised that it collapses almost immediately after being completed. The town meant to help him and managed instead to build a monument to incompetence and carelessness in the shape of his home. The thing that was supposed to restore what the storm took became another loss. Ned breaks. The episode depicts this with genuine craft. The breakdown is not comedic in the way Homer's failures are comedic. It is uncomfortable. Ned says things he has been holding for years, in a voice that is recognizable as the voice of someone whose patience has finally collapsed into something more honest. He insults people. He names what they have done to him. He says the quiet part out loud. And then he is institutionalized. The psychiatric care he receives reveals what the show has been suggesting since Ned first appeared. His niceness is not natural. It is not a personality trait that emerged organically from character and values. It is the output of behavioral conditioning administered during his childhood. Ned was a violent and uncontrollable child whose parents, philosophically opposed to discipline, took him to a psychiatrist who spent years conditioning the aggression out of him through a process that the show depicts as effective and also as a kind of damage. Ned's kindness is a cage built around a feral child. His patience is pathological suppression. His forgiveness of Homer is not grace. It is the programmed response of a mind that was wired, before Ned was old enough to consent to the wiring, to never allow itself to feel the thing it most needs to feel. Everything about Ned looks different with this knowledge in it. His patience with Homer, sustained across decades of damage and loss and daily friction, is not evidence of his moral character. It is evidence of how thoroughly the conditioning holds. Homer kills his wife and Ned forgives him because his brain will not permit the alternative, and that is not saintly. It is a prison sentence. His religious faith, which the show has always depicted as genuine and deeply held, takes on a dimension of tragedy once you understand that Ned needs an external framework, not only to practice virtue, but to explain why virtue is not rewarded. He needs to believe in something that guarantees the suffering makes sense, that the accumulation of loss and forgiveness and unrequited patience is building towards something. Because the alternative, that the suffering is simply the cost of being Ned in Springfield with no ledger being kept and no reward forthcoming, is too much to sustain. And then the show confirms the tragedy with its most specific cruelty. Within the fiction of The Simpsons, God exists. This has been established in multiple episodes across multiple seasons. God has appeared in Homer's dream and given him personal guidance. God has spoken directly to Homer, acknowledging him by name, engaging with his questions, telling him that his time is coming. God has had direct, personal, conversational interactions with Homer Simpson. Homer, who falls asleep in church, who eats during prayer, who treats religious observance as an obstacle between himself and his couch, who was struck by lightning once while doing something he definitely should not have been doing on a Sunday. Homer Simpson has had more direct divine communication than any other character in Springfield. Ned Flanders, who has given his entire life to his faith, who attends every service and reads scripture and prays daily and organizes church events and has built his entire moral framework around his belief, has received silence. God talks to Homer. God does not talk to Ned. The drunk who dozes through the service gets the direct line. The devout man who shows up every week and means every word he says gets nothing back. This is where the show stops being comedy and starts being a thesis statement about how systems work. The system does not reward goodness. Not in Springfield. Not in the world the show has been depicting for 36 years. The system rewards compliance. It rewards the kind of person who will not push back, who will not ask questions, who will absorb what is given and continue functioning without creating complications. Homer is that person, though he arrived at it through damage. His compliance is the product of radiation and a crayon and a childhood shaped by the exile of his mother. His inability to resist the system is not a choice he made. It is the consequence of what was done to him. Ned's compliance is the product of conditioning administered to a child. His inability to sustain anger, to maintain the kind of productive resistance that might actually change something, is not a virtue. It is a surgical alteration of his capacity for self-defense. Both of them are compliant. Both of them stay where they are placed. Both of them absorb what the system delivers without mounting any effective resistance. The difference is what they receive in return. Homer gets the warm family and the unearned job security and the divine conversation and the episodic adventures and the body that refuses to die. Ned gets the dead wife and the collapsed house and the psychiatrist and the God who does not answer. And the gap between them, the gap between the man who does everything right and the man who does everything wrong, has never once closed in 36 years. Because the gap is the point. The gap is what the system produces and what the system needs. Homer stays at the plant because the damage burns inflicted on him ensures he will. Ned stays in the community and keeps forgiving and keeps praying because the conditioning ensures he will. Both of them function exactly as the structures around them require them to function. And the structures are fine with that. The structures do not need justice. They need things to keep moving. Section 12. What Springfield is actually telling you. Take all of it. Hold every thread we have been following tonight and look at them at once. The radiation theory says that the power plant has been chemically and biologically altering every living thing in Springfield for decades, and the altered things cannot see what is happening to them because the alteration includes cognitive damage that prevents the seeing. The coma theory says that Springfield is a dream, generated by a dying man who loves his family, sustained by the last resources of a mind that refuses to let the story end. The Burns immortality theory says that at least one person in the town has purchased his way out of normal biological time, and that this person also happens to be the one responsible for the contamination that has altered everyone else. The principle and the pauper theory says that Springfield's social fabric is built on collective denial, enforced forgetting, and the systematic expulsion of anyone who insists on telling the truth. The prediction theory says the show does not see the future, but has been describing the present so accurately and for so long that the present has run out of places to go except toward what was described. The Mona Simpson theory says the town has been shaped by one man's grudge across 3 generations in ways that its residents cannot perceive. The geographic impossibility says that a town without a location is a town without accountability, and that this may be the most important feature of Springfield's design. Every single one of these theories uses different evidence, different logic, different assumptions. Every single one arrives at the same place. Something is wrong in Springfield. Fundamentally, structurally, in a way that goes all the way down. The rules of ordinary reality do not apply inside this town's borders. Biology does not work normally. Time does not pass normally. Truth does not have the authority it has elsewhere. And the show has been cataloging this fact since the first episode, dropping evidence across decades of broadcast, trusting that if you pay enough attention, for long enough, the catalog eventually becomes a picture. The show is not hiding its mysteries. This is perhaps the most important thing to take from all of this. The human skeletons in the basement of the nuclear plant were shown on screen. The three-eyed fish was national news within the fiction. Burns's glow after his treatments was depicted in full. The coma episode informed the audience about the permanent brain damage. The town voted to exile the truth in front of the cameras. Mona's story was told in one of the show's finest and most honest episodes. Homer's confession about the shooting was spoken in a canonical broadcast. The show has been telling you, every season, every year, in the gaps between the jokes and sometimes right inside them, it has been placing the evidence in front of you. The only mechanism that has prevented it from being assembled into a coherent picture is the same mechanism the show depicts operating inside Springfield. The comfort of not looking too hard at things that are probably fine. Springfield's residents cannot connect the evidence because the radiation and the denial and the dreaming and the corrupted institutions have compromised their ability to see. But the audience watching at home has no such excuse. What kept the connections from being drawn was simply the choice not to draw them. Think about what each of the major characters represents in the show's larger argument. Homer is the output of a system that succeeds in keeping someone below the threshold of self-awareness. Not through overt cruelty, not through obvious oppression, but through a combination of environmental damage and emotional deprivation and economic dependency that produces, reliably, a person who stays where they are put and does not ask why. Homer's limitations are not his fault. They are the system's achievement. Everything that diminished him, the radiation, the crayon, the mother exiled before he was old enough to understand what it meant, the grandfather's deal with the man who exiled her, all of it was done to Homer rather than by him. He is the product, not the producer. Lisa is the person who sees clearly in a system designed to obscure. She is 8 years old. She has been 8 years old for 36 years, and she has not stopped asking the questions nobody wants to answer. About the environment, about fairness, about why things are the way they are when they could be different. She is isolated by her clarity and she keeps asking anyway. That is not written as victory. The show is honest about the cost. But it is written as necessary. Lisa's asking is the only thing in Springfield that functions as genuine resistance. Maggie is the resistance that does not announce itself. The intelligence concealed inside the disguise. The power that has learned from watching Lisa that visibility is vulnerability and has chosen the opposite strategy. She is the long game. She is the thing Springfield has not yet accounted for. Marge is the sustaining force. The load-bearing wall. The person who absorbs the shocks that would break any system without her and keeps the structure standing. She is often the least theorized about character in the show, which is itself something the show seems to be commenting on. The people who do the work of maintaining things are the least visible and the least credited. Burns is the system personified. A century of wealth and power and ruthlessness, kept alive by technology that should not exist, sustained by the dependency of the community he has deliberately made dependent, protected by the incapacity of the people he has helped make incapable. And Springfield itself, the impossible town with no fixed location and no aging residents and no memory of its own catastrophes, is the condition that all of these characters live inside, the environment that shaped them, the loop they cannot escape, not because they lack the capacity, but because the loop has been built around them carefully enough that escaping it would require dismantling everything they have. The show has been running for 36 years. It has produced nearly 800 episodes. It has gone through periods of extraordinary quality and periods of significant decline and everything in between. It has been declared dead as a creative force and then produced episodes that reminded you what it was. It has been analyzed more extensively than almost any other work of American popular culture. It has been the subject of academic papers, fan wikis, YouTube channels with millions of subscribers, and long midnight conversations between people who grew up watching it and cannot quite explain why it still matters to them. And after all of that analysis, after all the theories and all the evidence and all the careful attention paid to what the show has been quietly doing for decades, the biggest mystery is not the shooting, or the aging, or the location, or the coma. The biggest mystery is the one that was there from the beginning. Why can't we let them go? Maybe because they are us. Maybe because Homer's desperate need to be loved resonates with something we recognize in ourselves that we do not always admit to. Maybe because Lisa's loneliness in the middle of a family that loves her but cannot quite understand her is a loneliness that is easier to see in a cartoon than in the mirror. Maybe because Bart's rebellion is what we wanted to be at 10. Before we learned that rebellion has costs, the 10-year-old version of us was not prepared to pay. Maybe because Maggie's silence is the part of ourselves we have kept quiet, because the world did not seem ready for it. Maybe because in a culture that keeps changing faster than most people can process, Springfield does not change. The couch is always the same couch. The family is always intact. Homer always stumbles through the front door at dinner time. The opening credits always play, and the family always converges on the couch, and a new episode always begins. There is something in that continuity that the rational mind knows is fictional, and the rest of the mind cannot fully let go of. Something that feels, when you have been watching for decades, less like watching a show and more like returning to a place. Springfield is that place. The impossible town without a location. The dream that refuses to end. The family frozen in amber at the moment we love them best, held there not by cartoon logic but by the specific human unwillingness to be the one who stops watching. The loop is ours. That is the last thing. We built it by returning, by tuning in every week across decades, by sharing the clips and debating the theories and writing the articles and making the fan sites, and spending nights like this one moving slowly through what the show has been saying all this time. Every time we watch, we make Springfield more real. We make the family more permanent. We make the loop tighter, and the timeline more frozen, and the ending further away. Because ending the show would mean admitting that the world it depicted is behind us now, that the years it ran represent a portion of our own lives that we cannot recover, that the family on the couch in the house on Evergreen Terrace belong to the version of ourselves that used to sit on the floor and watch the opening credits and feel at home. And we are not ready to admit that. We may never be ready. So the loop holds. The family stays young, the town stays impossible, the plant keeps leaking, Burns keeps glowing, Homer keeps surviving, Maggie keeps watching, Lisa keeps asking. And every week the credits roll, and every week we come back, and every week Springfield is exactly where we left it, because we will not let it be anywhere else. Because that is what Springfield is. Not a town, not a theory, not a mystery. A place we hold open inside ourselves, against all evidence, against all the years that have passed, against every rational argument for letting go. A place that keeps the light on, for everyone who needs somewhere to come back to. That is The Simpsons. That is Springfield. That is the dream. And wherever you are tonight, whatever time it is, whatever brought you here for these few hours in a fictional town at the end of the world, I hope it gave you what you came for. Rest well. Springfield will be here when you wake up. It always is. End of script. Deeper into the dream. What the coma explains that nothing else does. The coma theory holds together for reasons that go beyond the single episode that spawned it. The reason it has stayed in circulation for 30 years, the reason it moved from a Reddit thread to DVD commentary to a fake leaked scene that the show's own writers produced and then disavowed, is that it solves problems the official explanations cannot. Take the question of why the show changed. Before Season 4, The Simpsons was a different kind of show, emotionally grounded. The stories were built around recognizable human problems: financial pressure, marital strain, a father who cannot connect with his son, a daughter who is smarter than everyone around her and lonely because of it, a son who acts out because acting out is the only language his anxiety knows. The satire was sharp, but the emotional core was realism. These were things that happened to real families. And then Homer went into the coma, and then everything changed. The shift is not subtle. In the seasons following the coma episode, Homer goes to space with NASA. He joins a secret society modeled on the Stonecutters. He becomes the leader of a vigilante group. He discovers that his mother is alive and has been living underground as a radical fugitive from federal prosecution. He meets God, twice. He travels to dozens of countries, holds hundreds of different jobs, befriends and alienates celebrities, survives physical trauma that would end the careers of trained soldiers, and repeatedly becomes the most important person in Springfield for reasons that reset completely by the next episode. The show's own fan communities have been debating the precise moment it went wrong for 20 years. There are arguments about which episode marked the transition, which season represents the last great stretch, which writer departures or arrivals correspond to the tonal shift. The coma theory cuts through all of that with a single clean answer. The show did not go wrong. Homer's brain got worse. What reads as escalating absurdism is the natural product of a dreaming mind losing resolution over time. Early in the coma, the simulation is detailed and emotionally accurate. The characters behave like themselves. The situations are recognizable. The emotional textures are precise. But as the brain deteriorates, as the damage accumulates, the simulation starts to stretch. Details become unreliable. Physics becomes negotiable. The character behaves less like a real person and more like a fantasy version of themselves, bigger, more adventurous, immune to consequence, capable of things the waking world would never allow. This is what brains do when they dream, without the corrective pressure of waking experience. They inflate. They lose constraint. The things that normally keep a person's self-conception grounded, the small failures, the physical limitations, the social consequences of poor decisions, these disappear in the dream because the brain generating the dream wants them to disappear. The dream is optimistic in the way that only a dying person's dream can be optimistic. Desperately, extravagantly, with a specific kind of generosity that looks like magic from the outside and looks like grief from the inside. Homer goes to space in the dream because Homer never got to go to space in waking life. Homer befriends celebrities because his waking mind absorbed their names and voices through the hospital television, and his dream gave them form. Homer survives everything because his dream cannot let him die. And his dream cannot let him die because dying in the dream is the thing his mind is most afraid of. Not death abstractly, death specifically in the dream. Because if the dream ends, the simulation ends. And if the simulation ends, the family that lives inside it ends with it. A further reading of the shooting. The Who Shot Mr. Burns mystery has a canonical answer. The show provided it in season 7 and has stood by it since. But the canonical answer has problems that the years have not resolved, and 3 of them are specific enough that they deserve to be named directly rather than gestured at. The first problem is the confession in season 18. Homer, in a canonical broadcast episode, states that he was the one who shot Burns. He says this clearly, on camera, in front of other characters. Nobody reacts. Nobody investigates. Chief Wiggum does not reopen the case. The Springfield Police Department, which is admittedly not an organization known for thoroughness, takes no notice at all. There are 2 possible interpretations. Homer is lying, which is something Homer does when he wants attention, or when he is confessing to something in the specific way of a person who believes they will not be taken seriously. Or Homer is telling the truth, which is something that occasionally happens despite Homer's record on this front. If Homer is telling the truth, the official verdict was wrong. Maggie was identified as the shooter based on Burns's testimony. Burns's testimony was given by a man who had just emerged from a coma with a bullet wound, under medical sedation, in a condition that any defense attorney in any courtroom in the country would describe as legally insufficient to establish identity. Burns said it was Maggie. Burns fell on a sundial whose letters he himself acknowledged were not intentionally placed. Burns's own prior statement was that his hands on those letters was a coincidence, not a clue. The second problem is Burns's phrase when he encountered his attacker. "Oh, it's you." Not surprise, not alarm, recognition. The recognition of someone known, someone expected, someone whose presence in that moment was not shocking. Burns barely knows Homer's name despite Homer working directly beneath him for years. Burns knowing Maggie well enough to recognize her in a dimly lit parking lot, to greet her with a phrase that implies familiarity rather than shock, does not fit what the show establishes about their relationship. It fits Homer. Burns knows Homer's face. Homer's incompetence has been a source of friction between them for years. Homer confronted Burns at the town meeting directly. If Burns turned around in the parking lot after the meeting and saw Homer, "Oh, it's you," is exactly the tone of a man who is not surprised and should perhaps have been more careful. The third problem is the alternate ending. The production team fully animated a complete version of the resolution in which Smithers was the shooter. Voice recorded, fully produced, ready to air. This was shown later in a clip show and dismissed as the option that was not chosen. The dismissal joke was a reference to the O.J. Simpson trial. Ignoring DNA evidence would be downright nutty. The joke is pointing at something. Juries ignore DNA evidence. Official verdicts are not always accurate verdicts. The show is winking at you from inside its own resolution, telling you that the official answer and the true answer are not necessarily the same thing, that the case was closed rather than solved. That in Springfield, those are 2 very different things. The weight of Burns's century. There is a way of thinking about Charles Montgomery Burns that the theories have not quite reached, and it is this. Burns is not a villain in the ordinary sense. He is not malicious in the way that fiction usually depicts malice, as something personal, emotional, driven by hatred or cruelty as ends in themselves. Burns is something more practical. Burns is the logical endpoint of a very specific kind of ambition: the accumulation and maintenance of power, pursued with the patience of someone who has had more time than any human being is supposed to have, and who has used that time not to become wiser or more compassionate, but to become better at the thing he has always been doing. He was born into wealth. That is the foundation. But wealth without management declines, and Burns has not declined. He has maintained, expanded, and reinforced an empire that predates most of the institutions that nominally have authority over it. The regulatory frameworks that should constrain the plant were written during or after Burns had already been operating for decades. He has watched every system that was supposed to check him be built, staffed, and, in many cases, defunded or compromised. He does not need to corrupt institutions dramatically. He simply needs to outlast them, and he has. The weekly medical treatments that keep Burns alive are the most extraordinary detail in the show's treatment of him, because they are both completely insane as a physical premise and completely coherent as a characterization. Here is a man so committed to his own continuation that he has constructed a system of weekly biological maintenance, and without that maintenance, he would die within 7 days. The margin for error is zero. His life is managed the way a reactor is managed, through scheduled intervention, precise dosing, and the vigilance of a loyal assistant who understands the system better than anyone else. Smithers is not just devoted. Smithers is structurally necessary. If Smithers leaves, Burns misses a treatment. If Burns misses a treatment, the disease equilibrium in his body collapses. Every illness he has been carrying for decades surges forward simultaneously. Burns dies. Smithers knows this. Smithers has known this for years. Whatever else Smithers feels toward Burns, and the show has been honest about the complexity of that, the devotion is undergirded by something more utilitarian: the knowledge that his presence is literally keeping someone alive, and that the weight of that knowledge does not allow for a clean exit. This is the architecture of Burns's relationships. Not loyalty earned through genuine warmth, though Burns is occasionally capable of something resembling it. Loyalty built from dependency, from the construction of situations in which the people around Burns cannot afford to leave. Homer cannot leave because Burns's deal with his grandfather guarantees his job, and his job is his family's stability. Smithers cannot leave because leaving is a death sentence. Springfield cannot leave because the town's economic survival is the plant's continued operation. Burns does not need people to love him. He needs them to stay. And he has spent a century building the architecture that ensures they do. The silence after the vote: Springfield's social contract. The episode that fans treated as the worst thing the show ever did is, on examination, the most structurally honest thing it ever put on screen. The principal and the pauper is not an aberration in the show's logic. It is the show's logic made visible. Everything that happens in that episode, the revelation of Skinner's false identity, the community's vote to sustain the lie, the legal decree criminalizing the truth, the physical exile of the real Seymour Skinner tied to a train car and removed from his own life, has happened in Springfield before. It happens every episode. The only difference is that in this episode, the mechanism is shown operating in the light instead of in the dark. Springfield forgets the dome. Springfield forgets the nuclear near misses. Springfield forgets the environmental catastrophes and the times Burns blocked the sun and the moments where the town should have changed permanently but did not. These are not failures of the narrative. They are depictions of a community that has developed a specific skill over decades of living in a contamination zone under a corrupt employer in a town with no fixed location and no accountable regulatory oversight. The skill is forgetting. More specifically, the skill of deciding, collectively and without formal discussion, that certain events did not happen in the way that would require something to be done about them. The dome was uncomfortable. The investigation into Skinner's identity was uncomfortable. The acknowledgement that their principal had been living a stolen life for 2 decades was uncomfortable. Discomfort, in Springfield's social economy, is managed by collective reclassification. The uncomfortable thing is reclassified as something that does not require response. If the reclassification holds, if everyone agrees to it, then the uncomfortable thing is functionally gone. The vote in The Principal and the Pauper makes this explicit. The town does not merely choose not to think about the revelation. They formalize their choice. A judge signs a decree. The mechanism is laid bare. Springfield does not forget accidentally. Springfield votes to forget and then backs the vote with the force of law. What makes this episode feel wrong to the audience is not that it breaks Springfield's logic. It is that it shows Springfield's logic at work. The audience has been comfortable with the forgetting for years precisely because the forgetting happens off-screen, in the gap between episodes, in the white space where no cameras go. Seeing it happen in real time, seeing the machinery of collective denial operate as a visible civic process, is genuinely uncomfortable in a way that is not the show's failure. It is the show's point. What Maggie has been watching. The longest daycare is 7 minutes long. It was released in 2012 as a theatrical short, shown before Ice Age Continental Drift. It received an Academy Award nomination. These facts are noted occasionally in discussions of The Simpsons, but rarely connected to what they mean about the character at the center of the film. An Academy Award nomination is given to the best work in a category in a given year. The film that received the nomination is a 7-minute silent film about an infant solving a multi-step problem through adaptive reasoning under constraint. The Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, the body whose recognition represents the highest formal achievement in American cinema, looked at a piece of storytelling about a baby who cannot speak, cannot walk reliably, and cannot communicate in any conventional adult way, and determined that this was among the finest work in animation produced in that year. The film earns this. What Maggie does in The Longest Daycare is not an infant trick. It is not cute problem-solving of the kind associated with precocious children in films. It is strategic planning under adversarial conditions, executed against multiple independent obstacles, adapted in real time as circumstances change. She identifies the threat to the caterpillar. She assesses the environment. She develops a response. The response fails. She modifies the response. She succeeds. The whole sequence is executed without a single word, without the ability to explain herself to any ally, without the motor skills to move at full speed, and against a social authority structure that does not recognize her as a person capable of intentional action. The reason she succeeds against the daycare's authority structure is the same reason she succeeds at everything. Nobody monitors a baby closely enough. The surveillance systems in the facility are not calibrated to track an infant as a purposeful agent. The staff does not see Maggie as someone who makes plans. This is not a flaw in their perception. For every other baby in that room, it is accurate. Maggie is the outlier that the system was not designed to detect. She knows this. She uses it. The silence is part of the strategy. Not all of it. The intelligence is real regardless of whether it is concealed. But the silence amplifies the intelligence by keeping it invisible. A speaking, openly intelligent Maggie would be treated like Lisa. Tested, documented, watched, managed. Her peculiarity would become a known quantity, and known quantities attract attention that concealed quantities do not. A silent Maggie is a baby, and babies are beneath the attention of every system that Springfield deploys to maintain control over its population. Burns's apparatus of influence operates through the manipulation of adults. The radiation's cognitive effects are measured against adult cognitive baselines. The collective denial mechanism is administered by adults. Maggie is outside the operating range of every tool of control the town possesses because no tool was built to account for her. She was there for the shooting. She was there for everything. She has been in every room, unmonitored, for 36 years. Whatever she has been building from that position, whatever the accumulated observation of 3.5 decades of Springfield's inner workings has given her, the show has chosen not to reveal it. That choice may be the show's final and deepest act of restraint. Maggie's endgame, kept off-screen, off-page, outside the frame of any episode, is the last truly unknown quantity in Springfield. Not because the writers do not know it, because knowing it would end the mystery, and the mystery is the only thing about Maggie that her silence has not already secured. The predictions and the mirror. There is a version of the predictions argument that is more interesting than the conspiracy version and less satisfying than the statistical coincidence version, and it sits in the middle of both. The Simpsons writing room during its peak years was staffed by people with graduate degrees in mathematics, physics, computer science, economics, and political science. The show has depicted mathematically accurate equations on Homer's chalkboard. It has referenced cutting-edge physics research and passing jokes. It has made specific satirical predictions about media consolidation, political celebrity, and technological development that required not psychic ability, but genuine analytical engagement with the trajectories those systems were already following. The Trump prediction is the one people use as the anchor example, and it is worth examining precisely. The show did not guess randomly that a television personality might run for president. The show had watched Trump float the idea of a presidential run since the late 1980s, observed the specific brand of celebrity politics he represented, extrapolated that trajectory to its logical conclusion in a culture that was already blurring entertainment and governance, and made a joke that was also a forecast because the best satire usually is. The forecast came true 16 years later. This is treated as a mystery. It is actually a compliment to the writer's analytical capabilities and a quiet indictment of everyone who thought it couldn't happen. The Disney-Fox merger works the same way. Media consolidation was an accelerating trend that anyone paying attention to economics could have identified. A show staffed with people who pay attention to economics drew the trend to its logical destination and made a joke about it. The joke became real. What is genuinely strange is not the predictions that came true. It is the cultural effect of the predictions. When Disney bought Fox, the dominant public response was not shock. It was recognition. The Simpsons already did this. We have seen this before. The show had spent years making that specific future feel familiar, inevitable, expected. And when the inevitable arrived, the familiarity was indistinguishable from prophecy. The show did not predict the future. The show made the future feel like a punchline we had already heard. And a punchline you have already heard does not surprise you. It satisfies you. You say, of course, exactly as I expected, which is the experience that gets reported as prediction after the fact. Springfield, in this reading, is not a mirror of America. It is the mold that America keeps pouring itself into. The show ran long enough and reached deeply enough into the culture that the culture absorbed its premises and began, without quite knowing it, to generate the outcomes those premises implied. The jokes became expectations. The expectations became tolerances. The tolerances became the conditions under which the actual events occurred without producing the shock they should have produced. The architecture of Homer's damage. There is a version of Homer Simpson that the show presents occasionally and then withdraws from, like someone opening a door and quickly closing it before you can see what is on the other side. Season 12, Episode 9, Homer the Moe, or more precisely, Homer, the episode where the crayon is removed. The episode exists as a single canonical record of who Homer Simpson would have been if the things done to him had not been done. He becomes, with the crayon removed, not merely smarter in a quantitative sense, he becomes different in kind. He speaks differently. He processes the world differently. He can follow an argument to its conclusion without losing the thread. He can read something and understand it. He can have a conversation that does not derail into confusion or aggression or a non sequitur exit from the point. And he is miserable. The misery is specific. It is not that intelligence makes him unhappy in some abstract philosophical sense. Not the burden of consciousness argument that the show could easily have defaulted to. The misery is social and spatial. He is miserable because Springfield is built for the version of Homer that has a crayon in his brain. The jobs are calibrated for that Homer. The friendships are calibrated for that Homer. The social rhythms of his neighborhood and his bar and his workplace are built around a Homer who cannot see what is obvious to him now, and the smarter Homer has no place in any of them. Lisa is the only person who can match what he has become. And the episode depicts their brief period of intellectual companionship with a gentleness that the show does not always manage. A father and daughter finally able to talk to each other at full register, finally able to meet without the translation layer that Homer's cognitive limitations usually require. And then he puts the crayon back. Not because being smart is unbearable in some permanent existential sense, because Springfield is unbearable when you can see it clearly. Because the structures of his life, the job, the friends, the routines, have all been constructed around the limitations that he inherited, and intelligence without a world that accommodates it is just a clearer view of a cage. The show presents this as comedy, and it is comedy, and it is also one of the most precise things the show has ever said about what poverty of expectation does to intelligence over time. Homer was not born with an IQ of 55. He was made one. The radiation contributed. The crayon contributed. The absence of his mother contributed in the specific way that developmental support from a primary caregiver contributes to cognitive development in the years when development is most plastic. And then Springfield itself contributed, over decades, by building a life around the Homer it had already produced, ensuring that even without the physical factors, there would be no social infrastructure to support a different outcome. The smarter Homer does not fit because nothing was built to hold him. He was always going to go back, not because he chose stupidity over intelligence, but because intelligence without context is just loneliness with better vocabulary. Mona Simpson and the Shape of 3 Generations. The conspiracy that connects Mona Simpson to Mr. Burns to Homer to the plant is the only storyline in the show's history that spans 3 complete generations of the same family, and it is worth tracing slowly because its full shape is more elaborate than any single summary captures. Mona is a housewife in Springfield, married to Abraham Simpson, mother to a young boy named Homer. She is, by all available evidence from that period, an ordinary woman in an ordinary life, in a town that is not yet fully aware of what the man at the top of its economic hierarchy is doing in a laboratory on the edge of it. Burns is running a biological weapons facility, not a nuclear plant, a germ warfare lab. He is manufacturing weaponized pathogens in a town with children and parks and a water supply, because Burns's operating logic has never included a meaningful category for the harm of people who are not Burns. The protest movement that Mona joins is not fringe activism by the show's own account. The target is a facility producing agents designed to kill human beings. She participates in a raid. The lab is compromised. The pathogens are destroyed. And in the moment of their exit, Mona makes the mistake that will cost her the next 27 years of her life. She stops to help someone who has fallen in the chaos. The person is Burns. He sees her face. He memorizes it. He uses every resource his extraordinary wealth provides to ensure she cannot return to the family she left behind. And for 27 years, it works. Mona lives underground. Homer grows up believing his mother chose to die rather than stay with him. That belief shapes everything that follows. The desperate need to be liked, the inability to leave situations that damage him, the specific fragility that Burns identified and used when he structured Homer's employment, the man who would rather work for the person who destroyed his family than risk the abandonment that the absence of his mother taught him was the inevitable consequence of being himself. When Mona finally returns in season 7, Burns finds her within days, not by chance. He has been watching. He has been maintaining the pursuit of a woman who committed no crime against him personally, only against his weapons program, for 2.5 decades, because Burns does not let things go. Burns has time that other people do not have, and he uses that time the way rivers use time, persistently, without urgency, wearing down the landscape. Homer, when he learns all of this, does not connect the dots. He cannot. The damage that Burns helped cause, the mother removed before she could complete the support structure that would have produced a different cognitive outcome for her son, has left Homer below the threshold where these connections become visible. He knows his mother is gone because of Burns. He knows he works for Burns. The logical line between those two facts, the recognition that his employment represents a continuous relationship with the man who destroyed his family, does not form. The show plays this as tragedy, not comedy, and the performance is honest about it. Homer's inability to see is not a punchline. It is the long-form documentation of what 3 generations of the same family look like when one person with enough money and enough time decides to make an example. Abe Simpson's deal is the final piece. Burns committed a crime. Abe discovered it. In exchange for Abe's silence, Burns guaranteed that Homer would always have a job at the plant. The deal that protects Homergrams is the deal that ensures Homer remains proximate to the contamination. The deal that gives Homer economic stability is the deal that keeps Homer inside the facility that has been altering his biology for 30 years. Abe, trying to protect his son, made a deal that ensured his son could never leave the place that was hurting him. This is not a metaphor for anything. It is just what happens when powerless people try to negotiate with people who are not powerless. They get the best deal they can get, and the best deal they can get is still a deal written by the other party. The loop's true nature. The floating timeline is the last piece, and it is the piece that makes all the others necessary. Every theory we have followed tonight arrives at the same structural fact. Time does not pass in Springfield. The theories offer different mechanisms, different causes, different readings of what this means for the characters inside it, but none of them can escape the timeline's most fundamental property. It is a loop. It returns, every episode, to the same family, in the same house, in the same town. It does not move forward. It cycles. What the show has been doing with this loop for 36 years is worth stating clearly, because it is the most patient argument in the history of American television. The Simpsons is not a show about a family, it is a show about the specific American desire to stop time. To hold the family in the exact configuration that feels most right, the children young enough to still need you, the marriage still warm, the house still full, the routine still in place. The floating timeline is not the show's compromise with animation's practical constraints. It is the show's central thesis delivered through its structural mechanics rather than through its stories. We do not want these characters to grow up. We want them the way we want the houses we grew up in, exactly as they were, unchanged, waiting for us to return. The tragedy that the show has been quietly documenting across 36 seasons is that this desire, however understandable, however human, however rooted in something real about what it means to love a family, is the desire that keeps Springfield trapped. The loop is not something that happened to Springfield. It is something Springfield's audience chose. Every time we watched, we renewed the contract. Every time we laughed at a joke from a 1,997 episode, we added another layer to the amber. Every theory, every analysis, every article and video and midnight conversation about what Springfield really means has been another act of holding the loop in place. Because the alternative is not just the end of the show. The alternative is the admission that all the years since 1989 are real years that have passed, that the children who watch the show for the first time are adults now with lives that have gone various directions, that the world the show depicted has changed in ways that the show's permanent present cannot fully contain. The Simpsons is frozen in time because we needed something to be. Because if Springfield stays still, there is somewhere to come back to that is exactly what we remember. That is the loop's true nature, not a prison. A kept promise. The family is still there. The house is still there. Homer still stumbles through the door at dinner time. The couch gag still plays. The family still assembles. And whatever has happened outside of Springfield, whatever the real world has done to the people who have been watching since the beginning, the town is still there when they come back to it. That is what Springfield is. Not a mystery to be solved. A place that keeps the light on. The people outside the frame. There is a category of Springfield resident that the theories rarely address directly. The people who are not connected to The Simpsons, whose stories do not intersect with Homer's arc or Burns's machinations, who populate the town as background figures and semi-recurring faces and occasionally step briefly into the frame before receding again. These people matter. Their presence is what makes Springfield feel inhabited rather than staged. And the accumulation of their brief appearances over 36 seasons has assembled a portrait of a community that the major theories have been right about in ways the individual episode moments do not quite capture. Sideshow Bob is a character who should not work as well as he does. He is a trained clown turned opera-loving serial criminal with a vendetta against a 10-year-old boy. His appearances in the show span decades and have produced some of its most formally adventurous episodes. He has escaped prison more times than any real system would allow. He has been rendered harmless by stepping on rakes. He has delivered grand speeches in which he articulates his genuine intellectual gifts while attempting to murder a child. The show plays this as comedy and it works as comedy. But Bob is also a specific kind of Springfield tragedy. He is the town's most intelligent resident, by most measures, trapped in an existence defined by a grudge against a boy who cannot help being what he is. Springfield did not make Bob what he is. But Springfield could not have been a worse environment for someone with his combination of gifts and instabilities. There is nowhere in Springfield for Bob to be what he actually is. Every institution, every social structure, every available role is calibrated for the town's cognitive mean, which the radiation theory would place significantly below Bob's natural level. He cannot be a lawyer in Springfield. He cannot be a conductor in Springfield. He cannot sustain the life his gifts imply in a town that is constitutionally incapable of meeting him at the level he requires. So he is a clown who stepped on rakes until he became a murderer. Whether or not the radiation theory is the mechanism, the result is the same. Springfield consumes people who are too different from its mean. Lisa is isolated. Bob is radicalized. The smart people in Springfield are the loneliest ones because the town cannot hold them, and eventually loneliness of that particular kind becomes something harder. Fat Tony is another case study in Springfield's relationship with illegality and order. Springfield has an active organized crime presence in the person of Fat Tony and his associates. They operate openly enough that their existence is known to the police, known to the residents, and treated as one of those things that Springfield has decided to file under acceptable features of local life. Fat Tony attends town events. He does business with legitimate Springfield institutions. He socializes within the community. The Springfield Police Department knows he exists. Chief Wiggum knows he exists. The relationship between Wiggum and Fat Tony has been depicted across multiple episodes as something considerably more complicated than adversarial. What this means for the theory of Springfield as a company town is that Burns is not the only illegitimate power structure operating inside the town's borders. There is a second one, operating in parallel, tolerated by the same law enforcement that tolerates Burns's 342 violations. Two parallel illegitimate power structures, each maintaining their operation through the accommodation of an institution that should constrain them, and neither one particularly aware of the other's structural role in keeping Springfield functional. The town needs Burns for electricity and employment. It may need Fat Tony for services that legitimate Springfield institutions decline to provide. The economy of a contaminated, cognitively compromised, geographically indeterminate company town probably has holes in it that only informal economies can fill. Fat Tony, in this reading, is not a disruption to Springfield's social order. He is part of it. Apu has spent decades running the Quick E-Mart, a convenience store that is open around the clock, 7 days a week, staffed essentially by one person working almost all of those hours. He has a PhD in computer science from Caltech. He is the most educated person working a retail job in the history of television, and the show has treated this primarily as a source of either gentle comedy or genuine warmth depending on the episode. But in the context of Springfield's contamination theory and its economic structure, Apu is worth thinking about differently. He came to Springfield with skills that should have placed him in a completely different professional category. He stayed. He built his life here, married here, raised children here, and somewhere in the distance between what he was capable of and what he spends his days doing, there is a question the show has occasionally touched and never fully answered. What is it about Springfield that keeps people, not just the people born here, who have the radiation theory and the cognitive damage to explain their inability to perceive the loop and leave it, but the people who came here from elsewhere who arrived as adults with intact cognition and full awareness of the world outside Springfield's borders? Apu could leave. He chose not to. Or perhaps the choice is more complicated than it appears, because Springfield has a specific gravity that is not fully explained by conscious decision. People come to Springfield, and the years accumulate, and the town becomes the place that holds the things they have built. And leaving means leaving those things behind, and that calculus eventually becomes harder to execute than staying. Springfield is very good at becoming the place where your life is, even if your life would have been different somewhere else. That may be the deepest mechanism the town has. Not the radiation, not the political corruption, not the economic dependency. The simple, incremental, completely unremarkable process by which a place becomes your place, and your place becomes you, and you become someone who does not fully know how to be anywhere else. The final note. Every theory we have followed tonight ends at the same address, 742 Evergreen Terrace, Springfield, state unknown, zip code unknowable. The house with the green lawn and the family inside it, and the plant on the hill above the town, and the town itself existing in a permanent amber, suspended somewhere between 1,989 and now, equally distant from both. We came here looking for answers and found something more durable than answers. A portrait. A detailed, 36-year portrait of a family that is impossible and familiar and broken and intact and funny and heartbreaking and specific and universal. A town that could be anywhere because it is assembled from everywhere. A show that keeps running because the people who love it cannot yet explain why they do, and would rather keep watching than work it out. The theories give us a language for what we have been feeling watching this show for years. The radiation explains the strangeness. The coma explains the loop. The conspiracy explains the damage. The geography explains the accountability gap. The timeline explains why we cannot let go. But underneath all of it, the real explanation is the simplest one, and it has nothing to do with nuclear contamination or hospital beds or secret deals between fathers and billionaires. The explanation is that Homer Simpson loves his family. That is the engine. That is what every episode is about, in the end. Under all the theories and all the mysteries and all the impossible things that happen in a town that should not exist, a man who is not smart and not heroic and not noble loves his family with a totality that his intelligence cannot articulate and his body cannot contain, and so it comes out sideways, in strangling and in donuts and in falling down and getting back up and finding his way home every single evening through the specific navigation of a man who may not know where he is going, but knows exactly what he is going toward. That is Springfield. That is the dream. And wherever you are tonight, whatever has carried you here, I hope the town gave you what you came for. The sound of Springfield at night. There is one more thing worth noting before the script closes, and it is not a theory. It is an observation about texture, about what Springfield sounds like when the jokes are not running. The show's score, composed by Alf Clausen across most of the series, is one of the most underappreciated achievements in American television music. It does something unusual. It takes the emotional register of each scene seriously rather than ironically. The sad moments have genuinely sad music. The warm moments have genuinely warm music. In a show that operates primarily in comedy, the score insists that the emotional content beneath the comedy is real and deserves to be heard. The music of The Simpsons has a specific quality in its quieter moments. The late-night scenes, the endings of emotional episodes, the moments where the show pauses between jokes and lets something be felt. It is full. It has a weight to it. It sounds like something that has accumulated rather than something that was written quickly to fill space. This is the sound of 36 years of craft applied to a consistent emotional project. The show has always known what it cares about, even in the episodes that do not care about much. Underneath the satire and the absurdism and the celebrity cameos and the increasingly surreal storylines, there is a consistent, unbroken through line of genuine feeling about family, about time, about the specific kind of love that does not announce itself because it is too busy being present. That is what the music carries, not the jokes, not the theories. The feeling underneath all of it, the thing that keeps people watching long after they have stopped being able to explain why. Springfield at night, when the plant is running and the town is quiet and the family is asleep and the light from the television is the only light left, sounds like that music. Like something that has been going for a long time and has not finished yet. Like something worth listening to all the way to the end. One last thing about Lisa. Lisa Simpson is 8 years old. She has been 8 years old for 36 years. She plays the saxophone. She is a vegetarian. She practices Buddhism. She gets straight A's at a school whose budget has been gutted multiple times by the man her father works for. She has a genius-level IQ in a town whose median cognitive function has been suppressed by decades of radioactive contamination from the same man's facility. She is the most isolated person in Springfield, and she is isolated by the specific quality that should be her greatest asset. She can see. Not everything. She cannot see the full architecture of what has been done to her town and her family any more than anyone else can. She is 8 years old and she lives inside the same contaminated environment that limits everyone else. But she sees more than the others. She asks the questions the others have stopped asking. She reads the books that would tell her what the questions mean if she could find the answers. She looks at the three-eyed fish and does not shrug. And Springfield does not know what to do with her. The show has depicted this across hundreds of episodes with an honesty that never softens into easy reassurance. Lisa does not win. Her intelligence does not change Springfield. Her questions do not produce the accountability they deserve. She asks about the environment and the plant keeps running. She advocates for causes and the community ignores her. She is right, repeatedly and specifically, about things that matter. And being right in Springfield does not produce the outcomes that being right is supposed to produce. What the show offers Lisa instead of victory is something quieter. It shows her still asking. 36 years later, still raising her hand, still writing the essay, still playing the saxophone at the window of the house on Evergreen Terrace at the end of the day, she has not stopped. The town has not changed, and she has not stopped. There is something in that persistence that the show treats with more respect than it treats almost anything else. Not because it works, because it is real. Because the version of a person who keeps asking even when the asking produces nothing is the most honest version the show knows how to depict. Lisa is 8 years old, and she has been asking her questions for longer than most people have been alive, and she is still asking. That is the last and most important thing about Springfield. Not the radiation or the coma or the man who glows in the dark or the baby with the plan. Lisa Simpson, 8 years old, still looking, still asking, still refusing to call the three-eyed fish normal. As long as she is asking, the loop has not fully closed. And as long as the loop has not fully closed, there is still something worth staying awake for. Even at this hour, even now. Sleep well. Springfield will be here when you wake up. It always is. The questions nobody could answer. The show has a specific habit that is easy to miss if you are watching for jokes, and miss if you are not watching carefully enough for the moments between the jokes. It asks questions and then refuses to answer them. Not accidentally, deliberately. It frames things as mysteries, deposits the evidence on screen, and then moves the scene along before the characters can follow the question to where it leads. This happens so consistently across so many seasons that it cannot be the result of writers forgetting what they set up. It is a choice. The show chooses to leave things open. The human skeletons in the basement of the plant are left open. Who were those people? How did they get there? How long have they been there? The safety inspector who cataloged them noted them and moved on. The show that depicted them showed them and moved on. The town that lives downwind of the facility that contains them has never asked. The three-eyed fish was national news within the fiction. Gubernatorial campaigns were built around it. Burns was forced to address it publicly. And then it was absorbed into Springfield's background as a local mascot, a curiosity, something you put on a bumper sticker. The question it represented, the question about what else the plant had done to the local ecosystem and the local population, was loudly posed in Season 2 and quietly buried in every season after that. Burns's glowing body after his weekly treatments has never been explained to the people of Springfield. They have seen it. Homer saw it and assumed it was extraterrestrial. The town panicked, and when the explanation turned out to be a medical procedure that involves enough radiation to make a human being emit visible light, they were satisfied and moved on. That the man who owns their power plant depends on weekly radiation treatment to sustain his biological function, that this treatment produces effects visible in the dark, that the same radiation he requires for his own survival has been leaking from his facility for decades. None of this was connected. The dots were there, and the town left them unconnected because connecting them would have produced a picture the town did not have the structural capacity to act on. The show understands this. It has always understood this. The questions it asks and refuses to answer are not failures of storytelling. They are the most honest thing the show does. It mirrors the real experience of living inside a system that is doing something wrong. You see the evidence, you register the questions, and then you go back to work because the questions do not come with solutions attached and the work still needs doing. Springfield is full of unanswered questions. The show has been depositing them for 36 years. And the unanswered questions are the map of the show's real subject. The places where the fiction pressed hardest against the thing it was trying to say and chose silence over resolution because silence was more honest than an answer it could not provide. That is the show at its most serious. Not in the dramatic episodes, not in the scenes designed to move you, in the questions it asks in passing and then refuses to answer, in the bones in the basement, and the fish with 3 eyes, and the man who glows in the dark, and the town that shrugs at all of it and goes home to watch television. Springfield is a collection of unanswered questions held together by routine, which is, if you think about it long enough, a fairly accurate description of most places people live. The questions are real. The comfort is real. The routine is real. And the fact that they coexist without resolution is not a flaw in the fiction. It is the most faithful thing the fiction has ever done. Extended section. The texture of Springfield, details that do not add up. We have spent time with the major theories, the ones that have names and followers and enough internal evidence to sustain long arguments. But Springfield is also a place built from smaller details, and those smaller details accumulate into something worth examining. Every long-running show generates detritus, the bits of world-building that pile up across decades of episodes without ever being organized into a coherent argument. The Simpsons has more of this detritus than any other show in television history, and unlike most shows, a surprising amount of it coheres when you look at it from the right angle. Tonight, we are going to slow down even further and look at the granular texture of the show. The things that sit in the corners of episodes and do not quite fit the frame they were placed in, the details that the major theories have not quite explained and the show has never quite acknowledged. The ones that were deposited carefully and then left for whoever was paying close enough attention to find them. Some of what follows connects to the larger arguments we have already made. Some of it opens different doors. All of it is Springfield, and all of it has been sitting there in plain sight for decades, waiting for someone to look at it long enough to ask what it means. That is what we are doing now. Looking. Slowly. Without the pressure to arrive anywhere in particular. Start with the Simpson family's economic situation. It is, on the surface, one of the most thoroughly examined elements of the show. The working-class family in the nuclear age, the one-income household, the modest house on Evergreen Terrace that is both a symbol of stability and a symbol of everything that stability costs. The economics of Springfield are familiar enough that most viewers accepted them without much scrutiny. But the scrutiny, when applied, reveals a set of financial arrangements that the surface does not explain. Homer works at a nuclear power plant in a job that requires technical certification. He earns what the show depicts as a working-class salary, sufficient to own a home in a suburban neighborhood, support a family of 5, maintain a car, and afford the kind of American domestic life that is modest but functional. By the standards of the show's early seasons, this was recognizable. A family that was not wealthy, but was not desperate either, occupying the specific economic middle ground that the show was built to represent. As the show progressed, Homer's financial situation became increasingly strange. He has, across various episodes, experienced financial ruin multiple times. He has lost the family's savings. He has taken on debts that should have been unrecoverable. He has made financial decisions of such spectacular incompetence that the family should have lost the house multiple times over. The house should be gone. The car should be gone. The lifestyle should be gone. And yet, by the next episode, everything is back. The house is there, the car is there, the financial situation is exactly what it was. The reset button that applies to Springfield's memory of catastrophes also applies, apparently, to the Simpson family's bank account. Which raises a question the radiation theory can account for, the coma theory can account for, the collective denial theory can account for, but which is worth naming directly? If Homer has genuinely experienced the financial catastrophes the show depicts, and if those catastrophes do not accumulate, and if the family situation resets between episodes without explanation, then either the show is simply not interested in economic realism, which is true and fine, or there is something else happening. Something that ensures the Simpson family's financial baseline is maintained regardless of what happens to it. Burns' deal with Grandpa guaranteed Homer's employment. Homer's employment provides the salary. The salary maintains the house. And the deal ensures that no matter how many mistakes Homer makes, the employment does not end. The financial resets may not be cartoon convenience. They may be the show depicting the stability that a guaranteed income provides when the guarantee comes from someone with enough power to make it stick. Homer cannot lose his job. Homer's job cannot be taken from him. And so Homer's financial baseline, however much chaos occurs around it, always has something to return to. Not magic, not cartoon logic, a contract. The question of whether Springfield has a functioning legal system is one the show raises repeatedly and never quite answers in a way that holds up across episodes. Chief Wiggum is demonstrably incompetent. The Springfield Police Department is shown across dozens of episodes to be incapable of conducting a successful investigation, enforcing traffic laws, responding to emergencies in a timely manner, or performing any of the functions that a municipal police department exists to perform. Wiggum is not merely ineffective. He is specifically, reliably, consistently ineffective in ways that benefit the people who have the most to lose from effective law enforcement. Burns's 342 safety violations have never resulted in prosecution. The radioactive waste dumped into local waterways has never resulted in an environmental charge. The cracked cooling towers patched with gum have never resulted in a shutdown order. The human skeletons in the basement have never resulted in a homicide investigation. Every violation, Every piece of evidence that, in any other context, would trigger regulatory or criminal consequences has remained consequence-free inside Springfield. This could be the incompetence of the police department, which is real and consistent. It could be the ambiguity of the jurisdiction, which we have already explored. But there is another reading. Burns's influence in Springfield is not merely economic. The show has depicted it repeatedly extending into municipal government, local politics, the media, and institutions that should operate independently of private wealth. When the show follows the money, it consistently arrives at Burns. He funds campaigns. He controls access to employment. He is the single largest economic force in a town that has no other comparable economic force. The question of why Wiggum has never successfully investigated anything that would damage Burns is the same question as why the German investors' assessment of the plant's compliance costs almost bankrupted them, while Burns operates the same violations indefinitely. Because the system that should constrain Burns is operated by people who depend on Burns's continued operation for their livelihoods and their positions. Wiggum does not shut down the plant because Wiggum's job exists in a town whose economic foundation is the plant. You do not shut down the institution that pays for the town that pays for your salary, not because you made a conscious, corrupt bargain. Because the economic logic of the situation produces that outcome without requiring anyone to explicitly choose it, the legal system in Springfield is not broken. It is functioning exactly as a legal system functions in a company town. It enforces the rules that protect the company. It declines to enforce the rules that would cost the company. This is not unique to Springfield. This is a documented feature of certain kinds of economic geography. The show is depicting something real. There is a thread running through the show's treatment of memory that has never been fully pulled. Springfield forgets things. This is established, discussed, and explained through various theories. But the forgetting is not uniform. Some things Springfield does not forget. The show has recurring characters who carry consistent histories. Ned Flanders remembers losing Maud. He does not forget it between episodes and discover it again. The loss is permanent in a way that most Springfield events are not. Grandpa remembers the past with a consistency that the floating timeline should make impossible. Burns remembers events from a century ago with clarity. Mona's exile, when it is referenced, is remembered correctly by the characters who were present for it. So, the question becomes, what does Springfield forget and what does it remember? The answer, if you map the pattern, is that Springfield forgets the things that would require action if they were remembered. The dome, the nuclear near misses, the environmental catastrophes, the revelations about the principal's identity, the things that, if retained and processed, would require someone to do something about them. But Springfield remembers the things that are personal, the grief, the love, the individual losses. These are retained. Ned carries Maud's death. Homer carries his mother's story, even if he cannot fully process it. The personal emotional record is maintained. Only the civic record, the history of events that would require collective response, is allowed to fade. This is not random. This is a specific kind of selective amnesia. The community retains what it needs to sustain individual relationships and loses what would require it to act collectively against its own institutional interests. Whether that is a product of radiation damage, or of the coma dream's logic, or of the collective denial mechanism the principal and the pauper episode depicted, the pattern is the same. The community's memory is organized to protect the status quo. What would destabilize the status quo is forgotten. What is compatible with the status quo's continuation is retained. That is not cartoon episodic structure. That is a functioning social mechanism depicted with remarkable accuracy across hundreds of episodes of a cartoon about a yellow family. Let us spend some time with the question of Springfield's children, because the show has been quietly doing something with them across its entire run that deserves attention. The children of Springfield are, generally, significantly more perceptive than the adults. Not more knowledgeable, not more experienced, not more capable of navigating the world, but more capable of seeing it clearly. Bart's pranks and rebellions are often exactly calibrated to the hypocrisies of the adult world around him. Lisa's questions are almost always the right questions, the ones that, if answered honestly, would require uncomfortable reckonings. Maggie sees everything. The adults are the ones who have lost this capacity. Homer cannot see the architecture of his own suffering. Marge absorbs without questioning. Ned cannot access his own anger. Wiggum cannot investigate effectively. The adults of Springfield are, almost universally, worse at seeing clearly than the children. The radiation theory has a specific explanation for this. The children have been exposed to the contaminated environment for fewer years. Their neurological damage, while present from birth, has had less time to accumulate. Their critical thinking capacity, while compromised, has not been compromised as thoroughly as the adults who have been breathing the same air and drinking the same water for 3 or 4 more decades. As the Springfield children age, as they accumulate years of exposure, they too will lose the clarity they have now. The show does not depict this explicitly because the children do not age. But the radiation theory predicts it. Springfield's children are the town's last clear-eyed observers, and the contamination is slowly taking that clarity from them. The coma theory reads this differently. If Homer is dreaming, the children's perceptiveness is Homer's hope. His children in the dream are the versions of themselves he needs them to be, sharp, questioning, capable of seeing the world more clearly than he himself can. He gives them what he has been denied. He builds them as the people who might be able to do what he cannot. There is a recurring image in the show that nobody has ever quite satisfactorily explained, and it is worth spending time with here. The nuclear power plant sits on a hill above Springfield. The shot of the plant against the sky, the cooling towers, the smoke, the physical presence of the facility above the town, is one of the most recurring visual motifs in the series. The plant is almost always visible from significant points in Springfield. It dominates the skyline in a specific way, not looming, not obviously threatening, just present, always there, a permanent feature of the background. This visual choice was deliberate. The plant is never not in the picture. Wherever you stand in Springfield, the plant is on the horizon or just past it. It is the background of every outdoor scene in ways that other architectural features of the town are not. You can go many episodes without seeing the school or the tavern or the retirement home. You cannot go many episodes without seeing the cooling towers. The visual language of the show keeps returning the viewer's eye to the source. Whatever else is happening in the foreground, the plant is there. In the background, on the hill, always visible, always present, always part of the frame whether the characters acknowledge it or not. This is not incidental set dressing. This is the show reminding you, visually and persistently, of what is always there whether or not the story addresses it directly. The plant is the background of Springfield, the way the contamination is the background of the residents, present in every frame, never acknowledged, shaping everything. Let us think about what Springfield looks like from above. The show has occasionally provided aerial or map views of Springfield, and these views, when examined, reveal a town that does not have the organic growth pattern of a real community. Springfield has features that are too neatly arranged, placed too precisely in relation to each other, distributed across the geography with a convenience that real town development does not produce. The plant is on the hill above the town. The river runs through a particular course that maximizes the plant's access to cooling water while also passing through residential areas where people swim and fish and from which the town's water is sourced. The school is placed in relation to the sinkhole that Burns created. The retirement home was placed in relation to the sinkhole that Burns created. The key institutions of the community are spatially organized in relation to the key features of Burns's operation. This could be coincidence. It could be animation shorthand. Cities do not develop according to the convenience of their largest industrial residents. Or it could be depicting something true about how the town was actually built. Burns has been in Springfield since before most of its current residents were born. He has been the dominant economic force for most of the town's modern existence. It is not unreasonable, in a world where Burns's influence extends through every institution and every economic relationship, to wonder whether the town's physical layout is itself a product of Burns's preferences and priorities, a town built around the needs of the plant rather than the needs of the people, a geography organized to serve the operation rather than the community, not through obvious malice but through the simple logic of economic power, which shapes space the way rivers shape landscape, not by forcing anything but by being the thing that everything else organizes around. Springfield's geography is impossible in one sense and completely logical in another. It follows the logic of industrial power rather than the logic of organic community development, which is, perhaps, exactly what the radiation theory predicts a company town should look like. Consider the question of what Springfield exports. Every economy produces something and exchanges it for the things it needs. Springfield has a nuclear power plant, but power plants generally serve the region they are in, not a distant market. What does Springfield make? What does Springfield sell to the world beyond its borders? The show has depicted Springfield as having a variety of industries across various episodes. There are manufacturing facilities, agricultural operations, a small tourism sector based on natural features, and the various small businesses that serve a local population. But none of these are depicted as the primary economic engine of the town. The plant is Burns's, and Burns's primary product, electricity, is consumed locally rather than exported, which means Springfield, in economic terms, is a closed loop. The plant produces electricity. The electricity powers the town. The town's residents work at or adjacent to the plant and spend their wages in the local economy. The local economy funds the services that keep the town functional. And the whole system depends on Burns continuing to operate the plant. Remove Burns and the loop breaks. Remove the plant and the loop breaks. This is why, as we have already noted, Springfield cannot act against Burns even when Burns acts against Springfield. The dome, the sunblocker, the safety violations, the contamination, all of it is tolerated because the alternative is not just taking on Burns. It is taking on the economic foundation of the entire community. Springfield is not just a company town in the rhetorical sense. It is a closed economic loop in which the company's continued operation is indistinguishable from the town's continued existence. The people who would have to take action against the company are the same people who would starve if the action succeeded. There is one more character the theories have not fully accounted for, and she may be the most important one, Marge Simpson. Everything we have discussed tonight has been, in some way, about Homer. The coma theory is Homer's theory. The radiation theory centers Homer's biology and Homer's job. The Mona Simpson conspiracy is the story of what was done to Homer. Even the theories about Maggie and Lisa and Burns and Ned are theories about how they relate to Homer's world. Marge sits at the center of all of it, and the analysis tends to treat her as context rather than subject, as the thing Homer is trying to preserve in his dream, as the patient foundation that holds the family together while the theories orbit around it. But Marge is a person with her own story, and the show has been telling that story in the gaps between the Homer narratives for 36 years. Marge wanted things. The show has depicted this repeatedly and with real care. She wanted an artistic career. She had genuine talent as a painter, genuine capability as an entrepreneur, genuine capacity for the kinds of things that the world outside of 742 Evergreen Terrace might have accommodated. These desires surface throughout the series. They are always accommodated temporarily, always acknowledged as real, and always eventually subsumed back into the role of supporting Homer and managing the household. The tragedy of Marge is not that she is unhappy. The show is careful to present her happiness as genuine. She loves Homer. She loves her children. She finds meaning in the life she has built. None of that is false. But the show also makes clear in the quieter episodes that something was given up. That the person Marge might have been in a world that made more room for what she was capable of is visible in glimpses and then gone again. If the radiation theory is true, Marge's patience and her repeated accommodation of Homer's limitations are partly a symptom of the same cognitive damage that limits everyone. The ability to sustain the kind of dissonance between what is and what could have been requires a certain tolerance for ambiguity that may itself be a product of neurological compromise. If the coma theory is true, Marge in the dream is Homer's most fundamental wish, the woman who chose him, who stays, who is there on the couch every evening and in the house every morning, and who has not left, even though there have been many reasons she could have. The dream's Marge is Homer's deepest anxiety resolved. She is the proof that he is lovable, sustained indefinitely in the only form the dream can generate it, her continued presence. The real Marge, whoever that is somewhere outside the dream, and Homer does not dream her as she is now. He dreams her as she was the last day he was conscious, exactly as she looks in every episode. Let us end with the thing that ties all of this together, the thing that the show has been doing that no single theory completely captures, but all of them gesture toward. The Simpsons is the longest sustained satirical observation of American life ever produced. It has been running since before most of its current audience was born. It has watched the country it depicts change in every measurable way, economically, politically, culturally, technologically. It has incorporated all of those changes into its episodes while maintaining the same family, the same house, the same town. And in all of that time, across all of those changes, the fundamental dynamic of Springfield has not shifted. The rich man at the top, the working family in the middle, the institutional failures below, the memory problems that prevent accountability, the denial that allows the damage to continue. These have been constants. Not because the writers are cynical or the show is nihilistic, but because these are constants in the thing the show is depicting. The arrangement of power in Springfield is not a satirical exaggeration of American life. It is a fairly accurate depiction of a certain pattern in American life, the pattern that appears when a single economic entity becomes indispensable to a community, and the community's ability to hold that entity accountable becomes structurally impossible, because accountability would threaten the entity that the community cannot survive without. The theories we have explored tonight are ways of making sense of how this pattern persists across 36 years of a cartoon. The radiation explains the cognitive damage. The coma explains the loop. The geographic impossibility explains the accountability gap. The collective denial explains the resets. The Mona Simpson conspiracy explains how it all got started. But beneath all of them, the show is depicting something that does not require a theory to explain. Something that has always been true, and that the show has been holding up for 3.5 decades, with the patience of something that expects to be here for a long time. Power maintains itself. Denial sustains power. The people inside the loop cannot see the loop, and the most anyone can do from inside it, the most any Lisa Simpson can do, is keep asking the questions, keep naming what she sees, keep refusing to stop looking, even when the looking is lonely and the town would rather she didn't. The show is not optimistic about whether this is enough. The show has never suggested that Lisa's persistence will change Springfield. Burns is still there. The plant is still there. The fish still have 3 eyes. But Lisa is still asking. And that, the show seems to suggest, may be the only thing worth saying about how you live inside a system that cannot be fixed from within it. You look at it clearly. You name what you see. You keep asking the question even when nobody around you wants to hear it. You keep looking at the 3-eyed fish and refusing to call it normal. That is Springfield. That is the show. And wherever you are tonight, in whatever quiet hour this has found you, that is enough. Sleep well.